Are we ready?
The TV show, it's on the air? Is that
We're
one?
up. Item 1, regular business agenda. Item 1A, roll call. Commissioner Welch,
Here.
Commissioner Wiseman,
Here.
Commissioner Yakubian,
Here.
Commissioner Fuad,
Here.
Commissioner Sulayan.
Members of the Transportation Parking Commission, good evening. First, I'd like to welcome two new commissioners that have joined the Transportation Parking Commission, Commissioner Fott and Commissioner Yakubian. Welcome on board. I'm sure you'll enjoy working with us for very, very interesting transportation parking issues that will be coming up in the near future, including tonight, starting with tonight. As the last chairperson of the commission, Commissioner Solaya is no longer with us. We need to ask the commission to select an interim chair or a chair pro tem just to go through the agenda process and get to the agenda item 4, which among yourself you need to go through the process of nominating a chairperson who will be the chair at least for the next year, and then that item will be repeating itself and you will choose another chair, or you can have the same chairperson to continue as the commission wishes to do so. So staff would request that one of you choose to be the interim chair or the chair pro tem so that we can go through the rest of the items, and as we get to the item number 4, we go through the selection of the chair. There's a script for the interim chair, also for the selection of the chairperson that we've included, so whoever that might be, you can follow that script. Thank you very much.
Well, you're sitting in front of the gavel here. So if you
Not by choice.
want to go ahead.
Okay, I will do that. And for the record, I am present. I think you mentioned Commissioner Sulaya and missed my name. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, with that, we go to item number 2.
1B.
We did number 2, the approval of minutes, correct?
No, we haven't. No, we haven't.
We haven't.
I would suggest we go with the posting of the agenda, just read that into the record, and then we go to the next item.
Item 2, posting of agenda. The agenda for the Monday, December 7th, 2009 special meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by Friday, December 4th, 2009, before 5:30 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Thank you. Item number 3.
Item 3, approval of minutes. Item 3A, October 26th, 2009 regular meeting approval of minutes.
Thank you.
I did have one quick change.
Commissioner Walsh?
On page 3, where I had brought up comments about traffic and speeding on Acacia, I didn't have multiple complaints from the principal. I had multiple complaints from several people, but including the principal.
That's paragraph number 3.
Okay.
Commissioner Wiseman?
I don't have anything.
Okay, I don't have any comments either, so can I get a motion to approve as amended?
So moved.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Item 4, selection of a new chairperson for the Transportation and Parking Commission for 1 year.
Thank you. So, commissioners, if you appoint your nominee, and then we'll go from there.
I would like to nominate Commissioner Welch.
Okay. Any other nominations? Mr. Bagdana, you want me to go through this, or it's
if
not necessary?
You don't have to, but
Okay.
that's just a guide for you to proceed if you wish.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to follow this. I think all the commissioners are familiar with the process. So we have one nomination, and that's Commissioner Welch. Any other nominations? Okay. I second that nomination. And with that, I guess it's we need to do a
Chairman.
roll. Yes?
Sorry, if you, there is a card, I believe, that would like to be submitted on that.
On
So
this item?
Once you seconded the motion, so we can open it up for discussion.
Okay, so
Before
I
you
open
take
it
your
up to public discussion then.
Ms. Sansoni,
Then you
we
would ask
do-
for a vote. After you have raised a name, you'd ask for a vote on the chair.
Before the vote, I believe there is a public comment that would like to be made into record, so that's why I believe we should go to the first.
This is the time to do that,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, I don't have a card.
There's a card of,
To me, there's a card in front. Okay. Thank you. I have one card on this item. Mr. Milano, Herbert Milano.
Thank you, Commissioner Sahakian. Commission members, my name is Herbert Milano. Good evening. The reason why I'm speaking now during the process of the selection is that the history that we have had with this commission in the past few years has been marked by a significant number of cancellations of this meeting. Some years we had almost 50% of cancellations, and there are continual cancellations taking place in exchange for special meetings, which oftentimes do not include, as you will see today, any oral communications, even though sometimes the items are just as regular as any other items. But once you label something a special commission, then oral communications is done away with. And I think that the public needs to speak every single time on topics that are of general concern that have not been addressed. My issues, besides the cancellation, which is a serious one, is that if you are going to select Mr. Welch, that we have a commitment to have regularly scheduled meetings every single month. Of all of the commissions in Glendale, this commission is the one that has the most cancellations. And it leaves many of the issues that are pertinent to the public. We need to have a chair who is going to truly be the voice of the public with concerning the issues that we have. I don't want someone to have simply follow through on the concepts that the staff is handing to you, because there are sometimes issues that are of very high significance. And one of those, for example, is the environmental impact reports. For the past several years, somehow the city stopped moving through to you, since the Americana, the environmental impact reports for discussion on how these new construction and development projects are impacting the traffic conditions in Glendale. I'm not against development by any means, but I am really concerned about how often we are giving exceptions to the zoning requirements and variances that oftentimes are fairly significant and must be considered by this commission. And we need a chair that is going to demand and expect that we get those environmental impact reports for your consideration and discussion in front of the public. Also, if someone comes to you, it is my hope that the chair will consider the issues that are being brought before you and you agendize it for the following meeting. Because if you ignore it and wait, it could be sometimes months, and I'm talking about sometimes over a year before we get a resolution on an important issue. One of those issues you will receive today. But it is truly important that if Mr. Welch, that you really are willing to take this position, that you're going to commit to having regularly scheduled meetings continually and make sure that the other commission members will be available. And it was my hope that Mr. Wiseman would have taken the position this year, even though it's your second year, because I know that you put a lot of energy and effort and you go out of your way to get things done. I'm sure that Mr. Welch proudly is that, but if you have conflicts within your job or other obligations that is going to prevent you from having these meetings, for us to tell everyone here so that we can make sure that you have regularly scheduled meetings all the time. I thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Bagdanian, what I'd like staff to do for the next meeting, if we can bring the records of how many cancellations this commission has had. I do not recall having 50% cancellations. So I'd like that to be recorded, and then just for the sake of our new commissioners, so they can find out how many cancellations we had.
Sure, we'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Chairman Pro Tem, I would ask our council if this would be the appropriate time before voting to address Mr. Milano's remarks, or...
You can discuss them amongst yourselves, but no debate or long involved discussions.
Well, I do have...
This may be off topic somewhat.
I will reserve my remarks for commission and staff comments, period, but I will have something to say about what he said tonight.
I believe it cannot be directly addressed to Mr. Milano, but you can make comments, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So you reserve...
Well, I might as well go ahead and
Yes.
say it now. Back at our meeting, I believe it was on August 3rd, we had a discussion about whether or not oral communications should be on the agenda for special meetings. And my recollection of the discussion was, if a meeting is special only by virtue of being time-shifted, if it's not a continuation of another matter from a previous meeting, or if it's not a single-topic meeting, then it is appropriate to have oral communications on the agenda. I believe this meeting meets those criteria, and I was a little disappointed when I saw this agenda not to see oral communications on there. And I'm wondering if, by our consensus, we can add oral communications to the agenda for this evening.
Mr. Chair Pro Tem, members of the commission, you certainly can, the chair can designate a specific time during this agenda at this meeting to have oral communication. Even if it's not on the agenda this time, it is your prerogative to do so.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. We did use our special meeting template this time, and I do recall the commission has made a decision, and it will be on the, if we have special meetings, you will have the oral communication. Before the meeting, we discussed that with City Attorney, and she has advised us that if you choose, or if there are anybody who wants to make any comments tonight under items that is not on the agenda, it's your discretion or the new chair's discretion to do so. So we will make sure that in the future that will be on the agenda. We use just the standard template when we prepare the agenda, and to be honest with you, I did not catch it, so it will not happen next time.
Okay. Thank you. So with that, what I'd like to do, I'd like to add item number 5 as oral communications, and that's right after selecting the new chair. So action item that becomes number 6, commission staff number 7, and adjournment number 8. Thank you. Okay, so at this point we have one nomination. If there are no further nominations, I'm going to close the nomination process, and I'm going to ask for a vote.
Commissioner Welch,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiseman,
Yes.
Commissioner Yakubian,
Yes.
Commissioner Fwad,
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Sahakian.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Sorry.
Welcome to the hot seat.
Sir?
Okay, so we'll have the next item, please.
Oral communication.
Item 5, oral communications.
Thank you. I have one speaker card, Mr. Milano.
Chairman Welch, TPC commissioners and staff, good evening. My name is Herbert Molano. I have been attending these commission meetings for several years now. I've attended even some of the joint meetings going back quite a few years, where I have been presenting some of the concerns of issues where I have income property, and where the situation, which we're going to be addressing later on today, concerning multifamily housing and parking. But throughout these years, I've been bringing up issues that are of fairly significant concern to the general public, besides just the parking. And I know it's about transportation and parking, but I think that safety issues are a huge concern, and they've been for a very long time. It was a few years ago when Glendale was recognized in California as being the city with the highest number of pedestrian fatalities. And I've been very concerned that we don't get reports from the police department on a regular basis concerning how we're doing, what policies they have, and how it impacts that. I'm concerned that sometimes when there are meetings, like the meeting that we had last year at Hoover High School concerning the death of this young girl in front of Hoover High School, due to this, very sad fatality for which we now have corrective measures taken. That some of the commission members were not present for that meeting. I know Mr. Weissman was there, and I really applaud you for the tremendous amount of concern that he has demonstrated. And he went out of his way to look and evaluate what Pasadena was doing and what additional ideas can come forth. But I'm concerned when commissioners are not so involved with issues pertaining to the community. And it is my hope that we move towards truly evaluating the worsening traffic conditions that we have in Glendale, the worsening pedestrian safety issues, and all the other engineering issues that affect pedestrian safety. But I have another concern. The other concern is that here's a city with 208,000 residents, maybe 100,000 potential voters. And we find that the selection of Ms. Jacobian is a selection of the sister of a councilman. And it is, with all due respect, I normally would not have an objection to someone being nominated to this position of individuals who have shown a record of concern. Well, Ms. Jacobian, I have not seen you at these meetings. I have not seen you speak before this commission. I have not seen you bring issues concerning traffic. I have not seen issues concerning the traffic safety, except just recently with your brothers' concern with regard to the traffic safety issue, and you assisted him in that, and I applaud you for that effort. But it is a big concern to me if we begin to give the appearance of nepotism and favoritism in positions of this nature. I spoke very clearly in front of the City Council about your nomination, and I think it is inappropriate. Because the feeling that the public is going to get is that this commission is no longer fair and independent and will be giving to the City Council an honest opinion of the issues and have a big concern. And it is my hope that you take that significant concern in consideration. Because I will come back again. I know that you're probably a very capable individual. You have a law degree, and you can add significantly to this. Unfortunately, the perception that the public is going to get is not a good one. Because nepotism is one of the characteristics of corruption, and we don't want to give the general public that type of approach. This is not a condemnation on your character by any means. It is an issue concerning the integrity of the commissions, and I don't want to see any other commissions with a similar issue of nepotism in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers for oral communication? Okay, then we'll close oral communications.
You don't have to.
Were there any staff comments before we move on? I mean, commission comments?
Okay. Just so you know the system, you don't have to press the button. Your speakers are on.
Oh, I'm not.
If
I
only.
think my chair was doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So if you wish to silence your mic, you can press the button and hold it, just in case. But at the same time, the mics in this room are always on.
Okay, let's move on to item 6, please.
Item 6, action items. At 6A is report regarding installation of speed humps on West Elk Avenue between the 5 freeway off-ramp and Pacific Avenue. At 6A1 is a motion recommending installation of 2 speed humps on West Elk Avenue between the 5 freeway off-ramp and Pacific Avenue.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Transportation Parking Commission, this item for Commission's consideration is installation of speed humps on West Elk Avenue. I will have a PowerPoint for you in a second. Basically, specifically for the interest of the new commissioners, the traffic calming program that was approved by City Council allows residents, in case there is a speeding problem on their residential street, that they apply to the city and inform staff that they have a speeding problem on their street or any other safety issues that they're concerned about. And then we go through the process of evaluation, engineering, we do traffic counts, we do speed surveys. And in this case, in case of Elks Avenue, between Freeway 5, off-ramp, and Pacific Avenue, there is a problem with speeding that the residents have brought to our attention. We've done the surveys that have, for that purpose. There is a slide that shows the location of the geographic location of the location of Elk Avenue, and then in the next slide more specifically shows the area. Basically what is happening is that cars that are exiting from the extension of the 5 freeway, from the ramp, the loop ramp that you can see there, they exit, and instead of make a left turn on Elk Street and they continue down to Pacific or beyond. Instead of staying on the extension of the ramp and then using Colorado Street, which is a major arterial, in order to access Pacific Avenue or going towards Central or Brand, this is basically a very quick way of accessing Pacific Avenue. As a result, there is a speeding, and if you look at the number of residential units on the south side of Elk Avenue, because the north side is more industrial, and there is businesses that are their parking lot off of Elk Street. So the majority of traffic is just coming on Elk Street. It's either coming from the off ramp or it's the residential traffic. In the next slide, where we do our engineering analysis in accordance with our traffic calming guidelines, we look at what's established in the traffic calming guidelines in terms of travel lanes. You should have a true travel lane as a residential street. It's a residential district. The street classification is a local street, so meets that criteria. The posted speed limit for traffic calming should not be more than 25 miles an hour. This meets that criteria. The 85th percentile speed, the speed that more than 85% of the traffic is traveling at or below that speed, is at 30 miles per hour, so meets the criteria. The volume is about 3,500 cars, which is excessive for a local small street, residential street. So it exceeds the threshold for volume. And then fortunately, it's not a primary response route, because on primary response route, when their fire emergency has designated as a primary response, so the fire department recommends against installation of speed humps or lumps. So this is not an emergency response route. And the width of the street supports the installation of a hump, and more than 75% of the residents on that street have signed a petition requesting installation of speed humps. So in the next slide, you'll see that we're recommending, based on the spacing that is available from the ramp to Pacific Avenue, we believe we can install 2 speed humps. It should be able to slow down the traffic volumes. On the average, the speed humps reduce the traffic speeds between 3 to 5 miles an hour based on existing speed humps or lumps that we've installed in residential neighborhoods in the city. So technically, with the installation of the 2 speed humps, we should be able to achieve a 25 mile an hour residential speed limit. Staff has notified the residents about the commission meeting tonight. The petitioner for this issue could not be here tonight. We've, however, notified all the residents in the neighborhood, which is our process. We do so. So with that, Mr. Chairperson, members of the commission, recommending that commission approve the installation of speed humps on Elk Avenue. I can answer any questions you may have.
Questions?
Does the commission have discretion to approve or not approve, or is it meeting the requirements?
Yes, you can. We bring this to you. We make a recommendation to the commission, so the commission does have discretion for approval or denial of a speed hump. And then the residents have a appeal process that if they wanted to appeal the decision of the commission to City Council.
Any more?
Make some comments about this particular.
We'll save comments for later. We're just addressing comments.
I had one other question. This was in response to a citizen petition?
Yes.
Was there any thought given anywhere to a no left turn, or to reduce the number of cars, or any alternatives?
We did look into that option, but what it does, whenever you put in a left turn or a turn restriction, essentially, on a residential neighborhood, it it restricts or penalizes the residents who live on that street. So in this case, if we restricted the traffic to left turns coming off the 5 off-ramp, then it's good for everybody. So that would push everybody back on to go towards San Fernando and then come back on Colorado to access the residential their street from Pacific Avenue. In addition, it penalizes the businesses that are on the north side of Elk Avenue, which their primary access, they're more of an industrial type, so they would have to go around, although it's not a problem, possibly trucks that can use Colorado to Pacific to come back and then turn into their residential, to their driveways or their parking lots, but they essentially will penalize the residents on that. So it could reduce the volume of traffic. That does not mean that it will reduce the traffic that is using Elk Avenue. Not necessarily all the traffic which is speeding on Elk Avenue we looked at was coming off the freeway, but it does have a major potential for that.
How did you deal with the fact that there are industrial and commercial users on that street as property owners? Are they counted in that 78%, or are they just excluded?
No, we don't. We don't take their signature. We do not. The calming only deals with traffic calming only deals with the residents who live on that particular street. They are very rare. This is one of the rare situations which we actually have an industrial, commercial type of a land uses across from a residential street.
Have you had notice of any opposition?
We have not received any opposition from anyone. Obviously, there are residents who did not sign the petition, but that does not mean they were for or against the installation.
Any other questions? Okay, I do have 2 speaker cards here. First would be Ellen Murguia.
My name is Ellen Murguia. I've lived on West Elk for over 35 years. It's always very interesting at the holiday period if you try to back out of your driveway, or any day of the week to try to back out of your driveway to get on to Elk to either go to San Fernando Road, which is the route I usually take, or to Pacific. And it's always very interesting on hot summer evenings when the screeching of tires and the leaving of rubber, the next morning you go out and look to see who's been hit, whose car's been hit. If nobody's car's been hit, you figure out how long the rubber is on the street and go, gee, this was a short one this time, or gee, it's a long one this time. There's always been a problem with traffic on West Elk. It is a small street with parking on both sides. It's just very speedy. I come off the 5 freeway and make a left turn. I've been also come up San Fernando Road and come down Elk that way and have to wait at a stop sign for a line of traffic making a left turn without pausing or even noticing. And if you somehow manage to get through your stop, the people who are making a left turn are not pleased with you going down your street. They think they should have the right of way. I think the speed bumps will do a great deal to allow the residents to get in and out of their driveways without waiting an absurdly long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Jorge Murguia.
Hi. I think the problem is saying when I can get out from the.
Sir, could you please state your name for the record, please?
How can get out from the driveway because they don't, instead of waiting for you, they blow the horn at you. They shoot. They get courtesy to wait a little for you, but they don't wait. Then sometimes the guys are coming so in a hurry. That's the problem.
Okay.
That's it. I think it's it.
And can you please state your name for the record? Your name?
Jorge Murguia.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Are there any other public speakers on this item for West Elk Avenue? Okay, I'll close the public hearing section. Commissioner comments, please.
I'd like to make,
I get to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Typically for neighborhood petitions for speed bumps, if all of the requirements are met and if nobody is in opposition and if there are no compelling reasons not to do it, I typically am in support of it, and as I am this time. I don't think
Okay.
I have anything else.
I agree with Mr. Weissman.
I'd like to add something.
Yes.
I had the opportunity to be able to park my car on West Elk 2 times for about 20 minutes on each occasion. And on both occasions, I was shocked to see cars coming down that street at an exceptional rate of speed off the freeway. And I immediately felt for the residents who must be living on that street. I thought it was a very scary situation. Again, it was 2 different times during the day that I witnessed this. My feeling is it has met the guidelines. It is not a primary fire response route. I appreciate the fact that it's not going to have a significant impact on the traffic in the area in terms of rerouting. So with the Commissioner Wiseman and Fuad, I also agree with that.
Commissioner Sahakian?
Yes, a couple of comments I'd like to make. There is no doubt in my mind that Elk Street is being used as cut-through traffic. The ADT, average daily traffic, shows in excess of 3,500. And I checked the site myself. It is used for cut-through traffic. Now, unfortunately, the speed humps design that could fit the stretch of the streets accommodates only 2 speed humps. It doesn't accommodate 3, which is less of a nuisance to motorists to discourage them using the street itself. Another problem that the residents need to keep in mind is that with speed humps comes noise. If the traffic volume doesn't go down and the speed doesn't go down, you like it or not, there is a bump factor. And depending how old or how new the car is or what type of vehicle it is, the noise will increase on the street. I'm in support 100% of the speed humps. It meets all the requirements. But I'm not sure, honestly, if it's going to resolve 100% the situation. Well, nothing resolves 100% the situation. I was also thinking of turn restrictions like my colleague, Mr. Fuad. And I've studied turn restrictions for cut-through traffic in other areas. Unfortunately, it does impact the residents as well as businesses in the area. And it's not a solution for it. So I am also in support for this. I just wanted to tell the residents that be prepared for noise, because the volume of traffic you're looking at, unlike some locations where you have 800-900 vehicles, this is 3,500. This is substantial. I mean, it's almost a collective street volume, isn't it, Mr. Bagdanian?
Yes, it's reaching that level.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. I would also voice my approval of this, although I will say, as a regular commuter who very frequently uses that exit, I think I know the reason why a lot of people do cut through, and that's because the light at Elk and San Fernando during the day and commuting times is you can wait at that light for a very long time. I have sat at that light for as much as 10 minutes waiting to make the left turn there to go south on San Fernando. So that's it. I'm in favor of the speed bumps, but I do understand. I think that's part of what's impacting the volume of traffic on that street. So with that, can I have somebody please move item 6A1?
I will move in favor of item 6A1.
I second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Sahakian,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiseman,
Yes.
Commissioner Yakubian,
Yes.
Commissioner Fuad,
Yes.
Chairperson Welch.
Yes.
Chairperson, yeah, if I may, that's a very good comment. And before you close this item, maybe staff wants to look at that signal timing. And during, I believe it's AM rush hour. I don't know what time you observed it, but we might want to look at the timing.
I'm usually seeing it at evening time,
Evening
5 to
time.
7 o'clock.
I see it in the morning, too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item 6B now, please.
Item 6B is report regarding multifamily parking policies. 6B1, motion directing staff on parking policies for multifamily neighborhoods.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to give you a brief overview of what we are asking for the Transportation Parking Commission to do tonight, and then turn it over to Mike Nelson, who is our mobility planner, to give you a presentation. And then we have invited also, obviously, the residents and business people that are in the audience to provide input to the commission. If you recall, the City Council had received complaints and concerns about basically the availability, accessibility of parking in the residential areas. And this commission has dealt with many preferential parking issues that is as a result of businesses who have inadequate off-street parking, that they would be parking on the residential streets. As a result, we, according to the city's ordinance, we are obliged to go through a preferential parking permit process. Residents initiate a permit petition, and the commission reviews it. If it meets the criteria for implementation of a preferential permit parking program, the commission has the authority to approve that. There are other issues that Mike will go through and make the presentation on those that we're trying to streamline essentially the preferential permit parking program. Essentially, there are issues that we've gone through, and as a result of commission reviewing, receiving, or approving permit parking programs in different residential areas, we've run into some unique issues or problems, whether it's the petition, whether it's the occupancy of residents, on how do you count how many homes in a multifamily residential area or a single-family residence counts in the petition process, the fees that we charge for permit parking. Those are all the items that we thought this is a good opportunity to streamline them. Also, in the mobility plan that was approved by the City Council, there are a number of other areas that we will be bringing back those items to the Commission. Has to do with in-lieu parking fees, creation of a mobility plan, downtown mobility fund, and strengthening the TDM ordinance in the city that Michael will touch on those. And on behalf of staff, I want to thank Commissioner Weissman and new chairperson Welsh, who were part of a subcommittee that worked with staff from Planning Department, Community Development, and Public Works, Traffic and Transportation Division, to essentially go through this whole process that you're hearing tonight, to bring to you some of the issues and policy issues where we'd like to receive your input. Also, we invited some of the residents who have pending traffic preferential parking issues, that decisions that the Commission may make tonight or input that you may give tonight, it may impact their concerns in the area. So we thought it would be a good opportunity for the Commission to hear from them as to what kind of an issue you will be faced with should the Commission decide to make some of these policy changes that we're presenting to you tonight. We also have invited Chamber of Commerce that we felt the Chamber also deals with businesses that are adjacent to residential areas, and any decisions we make on residential parking that are adjacent to the business areas, that could impact the business in the city, which the Commission also needs to be concerned about the well-being of the businesses as well as the residents in the city. With that, I'd like to turn over to Mike Nilsson to give you a presentation. We also have a number of staff that was involved in the preparation of this report or this process that are here. And once the Commission, whatever questions you have, whether it's from me or other staff from Planning or Community Development, that basically merge in that area, we're available to answer your questions. So with that, with your permission, I will turn that over to Mike Nelson.
Okay.
Good evening. Tonight I will present the multifamily parking recommendations. And actually, before I start the PowerPoint, I'll give a brief purpose of why we're presenting these recommendations tonight, a background of how we came to you guys tonight with the recommendations, and also how we organize the policy recommendations. We actually group them into three separate categories. So just to start in terms of the purpose of tonight's presentation, we are presenting the findings of, we've been in a subcommittee for the past summer and fall, and we've come up with several different policy recommendations. We're really looking tonight to present these preliminary recommendations to both you, the Commission, and to the public to receive comments and input. And from there, once we get that input, we'll determine how to move forward with these recommendations for further study. And then from there, hopefully we'll determine a schedule and timeline to present these items in greater detail, and also potentially for the preparation of ordinances to both either TPC and council. So some brief background. The report on multifamily parking issues was initially prepared per City Council's request. Council was receiving complaints about the availability and accessibility of parking spaces in residential neighborhoods. A report was prepared for Council, and it discussed options for zoning code amendments, including the pros and cons of these amendments. Response from Council, the direction was for TPC to analyze these issues in greater detail. Response from TPC was to form a subcommittee to further analyze parking policies. So from there, we formed a subcommittee. Two of the Transportation Parking Commissioners, Chris Welch and Bill Weissman, were part of this committee. Myself, Krista Nasp, Alan Loomis from Planning, John O'Bagdanian, Tad Nabrowski from Traffic and Transportation, and Sam Engel and John Randall from Neighborhood Services were part of this committee. From summer through fall this year, we met several times to analyze parking management policies in the mobility study, as well as select a couple of representative case studies. We selected these case studies based on the land uses. There was a variety of, we wanted to really select some good representations as a laboratory to look into what parking issues are being faced in Glendale for potential application citywide. From there, we selected Car Park and the neighborhood around the Nestle complex. From there, we analyzed existing land uses, parking supply, parking regulations that are existing, and transit availability in both neighborhoods. From there, we prepared a series of policy recommendations that have been proposed to improve parking management citywide. From there, we organized the policy recommendations based on the amount of changes to existing policies in the existing code. We grouped these recommendations specifically into three categories based on what we could implement now. We have a set of policy recommendations that are part of implementing the downtown mobility study that we intend to come back to TPC in the future and council as well. And we also had a set of recommendations that are major changes that are actually long-term strategies that we intend to implement in the future to improve parking and mobility. But we wanted to, again, bring these to discussion tonight to get feedback and determine direction on moving forward. And with that, I'd like to go over the policy, the actual policy recommendations. And then, so from there we have the minor policy recommendations. These are, again, these are intended to be implemented fairly quickly, and these are limited to minor additions and or deletions to existing code language with a focus on streamlining existing procedures. And one of these is strengthening the existing parking code. And some of the recommendations that we'd like to move forward is to require on-site parking to be made available for tenants, as well as prohibiting withholding on-site parking from tenants. This and any additional code clarifications would be sent out to property owners regarding any of these changes or additions to policy. From there, we would like to recommend revision of the preferential parking district process. Some of this includes removing the time limits for administrative approval of districts and or expansion of districts. Right now, there's a 1-year limit. We are also looking to lower the threshold of resident approval of petitions. Right now, that approval is at 75%. We're proposing to lower that. Also, we are looking to not count vacant units as tenants in the petition process. Right now, if a unit is vacant, it's actually counted as an opposition to the petitions that are moving forward. From there, we're also looking at adjusting the prices for parking permits. Right now, the prices of parking permit is $6, and that does not even cover the cost of administering the preferential program. So we're looking to increase the price of permits so that we at least cover the cost administratively. We're looking at potentially tiering the pricing of permits. We're looking at reevaluating the current policy of guest passes, as well as connecting the pricing of parking permits to the consumer price index so that the pricing would increase automatically with inflation. From there, we're going to go on to moderate changes to existing policies. These recommendations are actually part of a separate effort to implement the downtown mobility study. These all will have an effect on parking management policies. In some cases, we'll need to create entirely new ordinances or adjust existing ordinances. We intend, again, to bring these items back to TPC for further discussion and consideration. One of these is a creation of an in lieu fee option. This will allow new developments or existing change of use tenants the option of paying a fee in lieu of providing parking per the city's code. From there, we also propose creating a downtown mobility fund. That would be a specific fund dedicated to focus on transit, streetscape, and bicycle and pedestrian improvements, in addition to parking if needed. From there, we also look at strengthening the existing transportation demand management ordinance. From there, we hope to incentivize alternative forms of transportation for businesses downtown and citywide, as well as requiring new trip reduction targets and annual ridership surveys. Now I move along to major policy recommendations. Again, these will be sweeping changes to existing policy. However, we intend to have this as part of a long-term strategy. One of those is a creation of a transportation management district where we would manage all the enforcement, infrastructure improvements, parking supply, and maintenance at a neighborhood level. We also are looking at the possible creation of new funding and financing mechanisms to fund mobility improvements, as well as potentially revising parking standards that would allow for stacked, tandem, shared, and valet parking to satisfy parking requirements as per the parking code. We would also potentially negotiate with operators from the private parking garages in the town to be made publicly available outside of standard business hours. From there, just to summarize, we're looking, again, for input and comments on these preliminary recommendations. Once we receive comments, we would like to be given direction and a schedule on how to move forward with these recommendations. And from there, I'd like to open it up for any questions that the commission or public might have. Thank you.
Mike, one of the things you kind of skipped over was in the preferential parking stuff, there was additional process about the TPC creating districts without resident petition. Could you elaborate on that? Because you didn't really talk about that.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, on that area, which is a little bit more an area of our expertise, is in the subcommittee there were a lot of discussions, as I said, that we've run into situations where if you sometimes creating a preferential parking can cause, now it can solve a problem in that particular neighborhood, but it can cause problems with other neighborhoods in the area where residents were sharing some on-street parking in their neighborhood. As soon as you dedicate the curb space to that one street, then the other residents in the adjacent street, which may not have adequate off-street parking or parking on that street, they no longer are able to park there. So now they have to go park and impact others' residential streets. Car park is a good case study, which we haven't been able to solve that issue because we have neighborhoods that petitioned for preferential parking. Commission approved it, but adjacent streets to Campus Street, which has the permit parking, now are complaining that now we can't park there, and our on-street parking has been impacted. We used to be able to park on Campus Street or a couple of the other streets that were in the area that have preferential parking. We would like to have potentially a district. The preferential parking ordinance does not limit the commission from creating, it does not speak about the district, but commission can create a district. It does not say that you cannot create a district either. Through this process, because it's an issue, we felt that we should bring that to the commission, and we should discuss it, whether or not if a preferential parking is initiated by a residential street, then the commission looks at it and says, now we need to expand that and create it into a district, because we know the problem. Once you restrict parking on one street, then the businesses where employees who are parking on that street, they're going to move to the next street. Under the current ordinance, staff within 1 year from implementation of preferential parking, we can implement a preferential parking on the adjacent street within that 1 year. All the residents have to do is sign a petition that they are in favor of it. It doesn't come back to the commission. There's been a number of situations where that 1 year has expired, and as a result, we had to bring the item back to the commission, even though the problem was created. It did exist immediately after we implemented preferential parking. So one area that we wanted to remove was that 1 year time limit, because we know when we bring an issue to the commission on preferential parking, we basically project to the commission that there's a potential that the problem may shift. So to streamline the problem issue, one is to remove that 1 year limit that the staff has to administratively expand the area. Two, the commission may think that it's a better thing just to create a district as you are reviewing that one area without the residents' initiation. So the neighbors do not want the other streets in the area not necessarily have come to you, but you can foresee that that problem may exist. So let's look into it as a larger geographical area and create a district. A district basically was created for around the Glendale Community College. That entire area, once in order to enforce students to buy student parking permits to park at the college, the city council or the city created a large district around the college, so everybody within a large radius from the college is forced to go buy the permit because it's too far if they were to park, on streets that don't have preferential parking. So something similar at a different scale can be approved by the commission if you feel that we need to solve the problem more in a larger geographical area. This could also impact the businesses in the area because, as you know, we have areas in the downtown that the businesses don't have enough off-street parking. So what happens? Their employees are parking on residential street. So then the commission has to balance of which has been there first. I mean, do you give the residents the right to park on the residential street? By the same token, a business which has been there for a number of years, also that doesn't have off-street parking, they've been able to use that same public street. Do you take it away from the businesses and give them to the residents or vice versa? So that's some of the dilemmas that came up with. That's why the subcommittee felt maybe looking into a district parking can be an option that we can include in the preferential permit parking program. Commission can exercise creating a district at that time if you think the circumstances exist to do so. So that basically where the subcommittee came from on that issue of district parking.
Questions? Can I finish?
One question on that. If the commission recommends a district, obviously it's going to have to go through council for approval. The adjacent or neighboring streets, do they still have to approve it via petition, or it's basically created and forced upon the residents?
Well, obviously, first of all, if the first stage, if we modify the professional parking, what the commission recommends, we will take it to the city council to change the ordinance. So ordinance change will be approved by council. If council gives the commission the authority to create a district, which I think they should in terms of you already have the authority to create preferential parking in the residential areas, then at that stage, if we were to create a district, we would obviously go through the public outreach process, make sure all the residents in that district are aware that the commission may consider creating a district because they have not come to the commission, but you feel it's necessary. So as a result, they are impacted. They may have to pay a fee, they may have to get a permit, and the fee could be higher than what we currently charge, which staff will recommend that we have a tiered structure for the permit fee. So they will be notified, and the commission should technically, I think, make findings that why do you want to create the district? You just don't want to arbitrarily select the parking district. So we would probably have to go through a public process, make sure adjacent streets that you may want to include in the district are made aware of that. Maybe it's to their advantage, it could be to their disadvantage, depending on what analysis staff does and present it for your consideration.
My concern is it should be more than just a notification process. Like you said, we need to find some type of findings and a foundation of why we're forcing a street to have restricted parking hours. If their guests are parking, then they're going to have to pay for it and what have you. Okay, well taken. It's a good policy.
Commissioner, questions?
No, I just wanted to, on that, Mr. Baghdad, and there was also, was there a mention of a counter petition that would be available to those residents in the affected adjacent streets, and in this process of notification, would they then be able to, say, counter petition the process?
Yes. As we will create an opportunity, a process where we will notify everybody that, let's say, after considering a or one or two streets, the commission wants to create a district. Mm-hmm. We will then notify all the residents. We will create a neighborhood meeting, which we've done in the past, that will give them an opportunity, rather than in an informal manner, to gather together, and everybody will share their concerns about, if you create a district, what would that mean? First, educating them. Secondly, hearing from the neighborhood if creating a district, is it going to be a good idea or a bad idea? Then our findings will be presented to the commission, and then you can make a decision at that point. And also addressing Commissioner Sahakian's concern that we just don't send them a letter and say, okay, the commission is going to consider a district and come to the meeting, and that's it. If you made a decision, that's over. No, I think it will be a good practice to create an opportunity in advance of the commission meeting, a neighborhood type of a meeting, to allow them to express their positive or negative reaction to that district.
And just to mention briefly, we talked about this a great deal in the subcommittee, and I think the feeling was that if we do want to take on this responsibility, it's not something we can just do by fiat. There has to be findings, as Commissioner Sahakian mentioned. There has to be a public outreach process and a public participation process, maybe even other safeguards like requiring a supermajority vote of the commission or some other thing, were all items that we discussed.
Well, I have a number of comments and concerns. I'm just wondering how are we going to discuss this?
At this point, we're going to focus on questions for staff. Then we're going to take comments from the public.
Okay, good.
And then we'll close the public hearing and have more broad
We're sort of
discussions.
jumping all over.
Yeah, but I'm trying to keep it to questions now. We'll do the public hearing, and then we'll open it up for more.
Just to be clear, okay, this is citywide. We talked about Brand Boulevard and adjacent streets in your examples in Carr Park, but this would be citywide even on like Pacific. I mean, streets with commercial abutting residential as well.
That's correct. This is citywide. Some parts of Mike's presentation has to do with in-lieu parking fees and the mobility, transportation, mobility fund. Those could be more focused as we bring them back to the commission, will be focused more in the downtown area. But the preferential parking that we're discussing is citywide.
Because the dynamics of a Brand adjacent versus a neighborhood commercial center, I think, are quite different. So I just wanted to keep that in mind.
Okay, so let's...
one more question. If Jano or your colleague, maybe you can elaborate on the cash in lieu free fee option under the moderate policy recommendations. The first item, create in lieu fee option.
Mr. Chairman, and Commissioner Sahagan, the in-lieu parking fee by itself is going to be a major topic of discussion for the Commission. Basically, in-lieu parking fees, as other cities have approved, is that if you are a developer, if there's an existing land use that you cannot build more parking, you're changing the use, but you cannot add more parking, but you need to meet the code requirement. So instead, you will pay an in-lieu fee instead of having to add more parking, build a structure, or create more parking on site. You will pay a fee, and based on our research that there is on-street parking or off-street parking available in the area, then that development can go forward. For a new developer, instead of building, let's say, 300-space garage, maybe they will build a 200-space garage, because there's 100 parking spaces, either an existing downtown public parking structure that can be leased to them, or they can get spaces from an adjacent existing private parking facility. In that case, they will pay an in lieu fee, which we have to determine how much that fee is going to be. That fee will go into the Downtown Mobility Fund, which will then allow the city to promote transportation demand management, improve our transit system in the downtown area, so that all the things we can do in order to reduce their reliance on single mode automobile. People who are just driving to downtown area, we can create carpool programs, van pool programs, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the whole concept of an in lieu parking fee that there's a lot of discussion. That's going to be one big topic that currently working with Nelson Nygaard, we're putting together that item, and we will bring it back to the commission for your consideration. There's a lot of details with that. But in general, that's what we're...
So this is the same figure that will get generated from the trip generation calculations in the planning process, in the traffic impact report?
We will look at the code required parking and how many spaces that they can provide. Let's say there are 20 parking spaces short. We will come up with a figure if the developer or that land use were to go and build those spaces, what would that cost? Or if it's a new development, we will figure it's cost $25,000 to $40,000 depending on the type of a structure. Right. That if you were to build a new parking structure, how much that will cost? We'll say, okay, we will provide you with 50 parking spaces, but you will pay X number of dollars per space that you're deficient to the city. The money will go into the mobility fund. We will then either build more parking if it's necessary in the future, or we will use that for TDM programs. We can strengthen our Transportation Demand Management Association, or create carpool, van pool, or enhance our transit system.
Okay. Now, being devil's advocate, this is a one-time fee they're going to pay. It's a trip generation fee, 15, 20,000, what have you. Now, based on the square footage of the development, if, let's say, a tenant, his lease is expired, the new tenant is moving in, now instead of bringing in 200 employees, the cubicles now are 7 by 7, and he's bringing in 400 employees. Is there anything that limits that?
Those are issues that will be addressed. You asked us the most difficult question.
I apologize. We'll be discussing it then.
Okay, I'm going to open up the public comment section now, please. First speaker is Greg Astorian.
Hi, my name is Greg Astorian, longtime resident of City Glendale, a commercial real estate practitioner. That is whatever is left of it. Just a quick comment about a comment that was made about, first and foremost, of course, congratulations on your appointments, respective appointments, all of you, including you, Mrs. Yagubian, Commissioner Yagubian. The syllogism that the speaker, Mr. Milano, used on the surface may have seemed valid, but it's not true. There's nowhere in the charter that says that if you're related to an official in the city, you cannot be elected as a commissioner to any commission. Having said that, again, congratulations on all of your elections. I think you all will serve this city very well, and we're looking forward to working with you all. On on March 19th of 2009, I, along with some other stakeholders, attended a meeting that was dubbed implementation session, along with some of the downtown stakeholders. I believe staff and Mike and some of the planning folks were present as well. The suggestion was made that the business community, specifically the Chamber of Commerce and the merchants, to be kept abreast of what is going on with the traffic issues in the city of Glendale. Lo and behold, there was a subcommittee that was formed, and meetings were held. None of us knew about it, by the way. This is not to say that I don't appreciate standing here and giving you my feedback and my opinions, but along the way, if we are all involved, I think it'll be far more proactive. My request, without mollycoddling that is that the chamber, the stakeholders, the merchants be given the opportunity to attend these committee meetings and have an opportunity to participate in decisions that may affect the business of their constituency. With that, I'd like to share some of my thoughts on different parts of the report that you have in front of you. On page 5, under the heading of lowering the threshold of resident approval of petitions, the reduction of signatures, as was stated, is from 75% of residents to effectuate a petition, in my opinion, should not go lower than 60%. And again, the refrain that I will be going back to throughout my logical thinking here would be not to create any displacements because of the policy that may create problems in the future. It is my opinion that if you are to reduce that, drop it down to 60%, no more than 60%. Let's try it. It's a small step. Let's try it. Let's evaluate the outcome. And then if we need to make any adjustments afterwards, then we have the time and the resources to do so. On page 6, under the heading of enabling TPC to start a preferential parking districts process without the petition required, I think the input of the stakeholders throughout with the petition system itself is important. It should not be abandoned. Now, I understand that there will be findings and this and that. While I'm very confident in each and every one of you, there is no telling what your successors, how they will react and have thoughts about this new discretionary power. So it is my opinion that the petition system should remain. And in fact, if nobody has petitioned, there should not be any preferential parking district implemented, unless the neighbors and the businesses have not been able to get along and or handle the problem themselves. On the same page, under to adjust the permit pricing in preferential parking districts, should there be a preferential parking district, I am completely in support of it. I think it's wise, and I think it should at the very least pay for the administrative fees and so forth, so long as, again, that fees are earmarked for that purpose. Moving on to the creation of an in lieu fee option on page 7. I have to tell you that the concept is very, very good, and it's being used with tremendous success in different cities. The incentive, though, would be that the amount of the in lieu fee should be as such that there will be an incentive for the developer to do so. There was a mention of $24,000 per parking space being built, the cost of $24,000. If you're going to charge the developer $24,000 for an in lieu fee, the developer would have no incentive to not build it himself. I'll submit to you, if you were to look at the Pasadena ordinance, you will see that the in lieu fee that the Pasadena is charging is on a monthly basis, and it's at $135 per month. And you can get as many parking spaces as you want for the businesses. Yes, one more point. We should also look into finding ways to have the existing parking spaces, especially in downtown, the private buildings that there are, if I may have the indulgence.
One moment.
That there is about 25,000 parking spaces in the buildings in downtown. If we can find a way of utilizing those after hours for our residents and so forth, we don't need to build any more parking spaces, especially in downtown. I mean, that's if we can find a way to do it, that would be great. With that, I only have to make one more comment, and that is, if you're looking about shared parking, stacked parking, and so forth, you should as well look at the ratio of the parking. We are underparked. We do not need that many parking spaces in the city of Glendale. Thank you very much for your indulgence.
Thank you. Judy Kendall.
Chairman Welch, Commissioners, Judy Kendall. I'm representing the Glendale Chamber of Commerce, and thank you for listening to us tonight. I'd like to let you know that we just became aware of this meeting on Friday and received this package of documentation. and have not had an opportunity to discuss everything in here with our board of directors, but I am speaking on behalf of the chamber. And what we'd like to do is really request that you delay any, the acceptance of any recommendations regarding the existing parking policies and regulations until businesses in the potentially impacted areas have had an opportunity to express their concerns, give input, and advise staff of their needs. And this is especially important in these challenging economic times for businesses. And we'd like to request that any future workshops, and let me say also that we really appreciate the work that's been done by the multifamily parking subcommittee. We can see there's extensive time devoted to this, but we'd like to recommend that any future studies and workshops include the Glendale Chamber of Commerce, other business associations, and the Brand Boulevard cars, and again, any area that is impacted, that are potentially impacted by this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Pena.
Nancy Pena. I live on Maynard Street, and I've been there for over 30 years. The neighborhood has always been good. Yes, there's always been problems with parking, but we have managed. We came together a couple of years ago or so as a concern for the parking because of the use of the field at Glendale High School that made it difficult for us to park in our own neighborhood. It's possible to come home between 4 and 5 on a Thursday or Friday, that's early, and not find any parking on the street because of whatever event is going on over at the high school. So we met together and we tried to deal with that problem. As a result of that, one of the streets, or actually a couple, Harvard and Orange Grove, found out that they could have privileged parking if they petitioned and forget the rest of the neighborhood and the rest of the issues that were going on. So they petitioned, they got privileged parking, and it's privileged. What has resulted is I see parking available 3 houses from where I live. But because, think of this if it was your neighborhood. There's no parking on your street. There's only parking. It's a one-way street. There's only parking on one side of the street. You happen to come home, there is parking 3 houses away, but you can't park there because Harvard has privileged parking. They have become a little enclave unto themselves. They don't use all of their parking permits that are available to them, so someone else could go and park there, but because we don't live on Harvard or on Orange Grove, we can't park there. There are many times there have been open spots on Harvard. Maynard has been full. We can't park there. We can't park on Orange Grove. Orange Grove is many times open also. There are very few cars. We can't park there. It's not always, but things happen. Sometimes you have high school students that come and they will park early in the day at the beginning of the school day, and they may choose to stay there all day so that they have parking for the football game or whatever's going on over at the high school. So as a result of this, because of a couple of streets having privileged parking, it has caused bad feelings in the neighborhood. This did not exist before. You've had people from other streets threatening those of us on Maynard, making threats. This is war. Something is going to happen. That's not necessary. It wasn't like that before the changes were made in parking. That's what it is now. It's made some people feel that they truly are a privileged neighborhood, and they put orange parking cones and save a particular spot on their street. You know, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. So if it's going to be If there is going to be special parking, have it for the whole neighborhood, not just for a couple of streets, because it makes for very bad feelings, and I don't think this is what the commission wants. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ignacio Pina.
Good evening, good evening, Commissioners. Just to reiterate what my wife had just spoken about.
Sir, please state your name for the record.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ignacio Pina. A couple of issues. We did come together as a community because we did have some concerns about traffic, school buses coming down Maynard Street, which is a very narrow street, making a right turn onto Harvard and then onto campus, which was very difficult for these huge buses to make. The other concern we had was, again, the amount of traffic of outside people coming through, and also in the morning, the school folks coming in and dropping their kids off at the back gate. Most of that, I believe, has been eliminated. Very rarely do we see a bus come down our street now, which is good. But there are some other issues. During that time, a former commissioner had told us that, because we talked about preferential parking for the community, and that commissioner said nothing will be done until it comes out and we discuss it. Eventually, we find out that preferential parking for Harvard and Orange Grove, about a year and a half ago, approximately, maybe a year ago, we came out and found the signs changed. That was our notification of what the change was. Now we have 7 days a week we can park there. And we thought it was a community. We thought it was part of our group. We went there to help and support the people in our community, but we saw this change. No notification. We didn't get any. Commissioner Weissman was at a group meeting, and it was a little contentious. People have a lot of belief and a lot of feelings about it. And thank you for that. I appreciate you being there, and you taking some heat too. But that's there are some passions that come into play. But we need reason, and we need to think about what we're doing here. And we do need the place to come to the public and make the comments of those people that are against it and those people who are for it. If we would have had that ability when the first permit came for these two streets, I don't think we'd be here. But it didn't happen. So I appreciate that you're open to that and have that discussion because it's critical. And you're not going to please everyone. Someone's going to be upset. And there is going to be some passion there, unfortunately. So with all that said, I mean, looking at some of the information from your preliminary study points out that currently on the Carr neighborhood, the preferred parking sites are placed inversely to the demand. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that they have more supply than the demand compared to other streets? I think that is the case. And if your folks are studying that, then you found out that those two streets are not using all the streets for parking. And as my wife had pointed out, there's a lot of openings there. People want to park in front of their house. I understand that. I wish I could too. Can't always happen. I think the whole community should be on preferred parking, permit parking. And I think you should have a scale for those permits and a sliding scale with more permits as you need a new permit or an extra permit. You pay extra for it. And it should be limited because otherwise people are going to go crazy and just buy permits and then we have another problem. So anyway, I know this is preliminary. You're looking at looking more information, more discussion, more research by your people. And I think the facts will bear them out. And please use the reason when you make those decisions. Thank you very much.
Can I have a quick question? Have you not tried to get a preferential parking on your street?
We have more. Maynard has more people parking, more parking demand than it has supply. So it really is in conjunction with the entire community.
But the homes on your street,
no.
Have you applied for
No,
parking?
we initially wanted to apply with everyone to get a district preferred parking. And that's what we had talked about before we knew that the other two streets got theirs. So I don't know how much it would help for us to get in isolation preferred parking for Maynard. It's just that's a one-way street, and you only have parking on one side of the road. You have apartments on one side and houses on the other. There's just too many cars. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Herbert Milano.
Chairman Welsh, Commissioners, my name is Herbert Molano. It's been about 6 years and I've been waiting for this day when this particular issue comes before you. It's over 6 years. I want to tell you a little bit about a history of what you're finding right now. Here you find conflicting interests coming before you concerning residents. But this problem is not their doing. They're there fighting amongst each other, trying to find a solution to their parking problems, but they didn't cause it. This is a conflict that has been ongoing in Glendale in many parts of the area when there are conflicting interests between multifamily housing owners and developers, the residents, and commercial interests. I have a significant amount of experience in the area that is right here in Wilson between Brand and Glendale Avenue, all the way up to, let's say, Duran. So imagine that particular area of Glendale for a moment. It's high-rise commercial, it's low-rise commercial, it is multifamily housing, it's single-family home, right? The problem that we have in these areas exists because of variances that have occurred through the past several decades, where the idea is for a developer to get a favor from the city council to get a variance to have fewer parking spaces, which reduces the cost significantly to that developer. But there comes a point in which we reach a particular pivot point, if I can call it, where, an inflection point, where we no longer have on-street parking available, and then you find other means of basically trying to wedge the needs of these communities and the residents. And now it appears to be a conflict between, should we say, residents. And I hope it doesn't get to be that way, because I think there are solutions that we can have. The residents not only pay now for this particular fees to park on their own street, but they also pay police fines for parking or overextending their parking, even though they are residents of their own place as well, or their guests wind up paying for those fees. I wish we knew how much every year the police department collects on all of these fees, because their guests are basically wind up paying for those parking tickets. I will give you an example of the typical problem that is relevant to all these issues. The city built Orange Street parking several years ago to serve the community, the businesses, which I strongly approve of, and also to service the Alex Theater. But the city also decided to give BMW at least 2 or 3 levels so BMW could park their cars there free of charge. In the meantime, if Porto's Bakery, with 110 employees, wanted to have their employees park there, they were charged an amount that it was not sustainable for them. So here we have conflicting interest. The BMW dealership wanted to get free parking for their excess cars, and now a local business wanting to have sufficient parking for their employees. So because they could not afford it, all of those employees wound up parking along California, basically taking up all of the available on-street parking during various times of the day. This is about different interests, primarily developer interests, who want to reduce the cost of building their structures. There are ways of solving the problem. For example, today I went to 24-Hour Fitness. Some of their members were parking on California, but yet there is no sign inside 24-Hour Fitness to say free parking on Orange Street for 90 minutes. Some of these things are really fixable if somebody's really paying attention. On some of the streets where they actually put 4-way parking, the markings on the sidewalk were never removed, so they're like standing like 32, 36 feet out when it was needed, when before they were parking stop signs. Now that they are, maybe those needs are not quite as necessary. My point is that there are solutions to be made, but we have to recognize where those problems are. I am completely against in lieu fees because they are simply a facade. They really don't work. The city of LA, we have also the issue of valet parking, but the valet parking wound up taking the on-street parking of meter parking. So there has always been an excuse to reduce, and the incentive is very significant because it either allows a building developer, like Mr. Greg Astorian represents, to come in and build a higher high-rise with fewer parking, basically allowing them to sell more, should we say, or make available more commercial units, or it saves about $25,000 to $30,000 a parking space. So there's a huge incentive there for them to be able to go for the purpose of valet parking, but it's only a mirage. It never really works effectively. So I'm making a suggestion that there are solutions to be made. Some of them have to be fairly ingenious. For example, building parking underneath parkland. So, for example, in Car Park. It means a capital investment by the city, but it's about the only ways that we're going to have to basically make up for the decades of abuse that these residential areas have had. Right now, there's another problem, the problem with regard to the day of the week in which we have street cleaning. There is no place to put these cars. It's a significant problem. And in our area, we have to use the Glendale Unified School District parking. What I'm saying is that this needs to be studied from a very structural point of view. There are solutions that you can actually create. Some of them I think are valid about landlords and their practices, but it's not going to solve it all. And I also want to say that if you are going to charge residents or build income with regard to this, that we have yearly measurable objectives in traffic, not just simply collecting the money and increasing pensions and benefits. The money has to show in increased traffic and increased availability. So my other suggestion is that if you're going to implement something like this, that you have a measurable yearly outcomes based. For example, measuring the amount of parking spaces available during peak hours, like at 7 o'clock at night, and count them. And those are the things by which you should base whether these systems or these solutions are really going to have a positive impact. Thank you very much.
Next speaker, Razmik Grigorian.
Good evening, Commissioners. Before I start my comments, I congratulate all of you to be reappointed, especially the new ones, and I congratulate Mr. Welch for being elected as the chair. And Ms. Yakubian, I don't worry about my critics. What I will do is do my best, and I'm sure you will do an excellent job. So I'm looking forward working with you, gentlemen and lady, for the next year. I'm here today. My name is Razmik Grigorian, by the way, and today I'm just wearing my Glendale citizen hat. I'm a member of many organizations, but I don't represent any of them at this moment. What I'm going to speak today is based on my personal experience, not only as a longtime resident of Glendale, but also somebody who is in property management, who is in real estate, who is in development, and who has been a tenant. So I've seen almost every aspect of this experience in my life. And before I start my comments and suggestions, I have to congratulate the very hardworking city staff for this brilliant report that they have presented. Everybody, Mr. Loomis, Mr. Bagdanian, Mr. Engels, and everybody else who worked in it, including the two commissioners, I think you've done an excellent job. And this might not be complete, but this is the purpose of this whole process. So I'm trying to put my 2 cents into this. And one of the things that I was let me start with this little criticism. What I would have really liked to see is the public input also. This committee of community members and city staff and the commissioners that worked on this issue are, I almost know every one of them, and all of them are brilliant and good people, and I know they did a lot of good job. But what I would really have liked to see is maybe some apartment owners, maybe some tenants, maybe some businessmen should have been a member of this committee to have the community input in it also. So that's one of my recommendations. Maybe if this is an ongoing issue, maybe we could include all these people in there. The comments that I would like to make, let's start with the page 5, minor changes. I am all for increasing the permit fees. $6 a year is laughable. But please don't increase it to something which will be a burden in these very difficult times. So what I would really like to see is for it to cover at least the cost that city is going to incur in implementing this issue, and whether there is a study that we know what the cost is going to be, I don't know. However, $6 is laughable, but let's make it still very reasonable. The issue of the 75% approval, I think that was a huge burden. I was involved recently in an issue exactly the same. Maybe you gentlemen and lady will hear in the very near future of the issue that specifically I was involved with. However, 75% is burdensome, and that's not really democracy. A little majority, a super majority or whatever, maybe 60%. I'm not even agreeing with my colleague and friend, Mr. Astorian, but 60% is much better by 75%. What I would like to see is majority rule. And the vacant units that used to be counted as negative, that was just, again, laughable, and I'm glad that the committee is recommending that to be taken care of and not if it's a vacant, then there's abstention, I believe. And that's how we should treat it. On page 6, enabling TPC to start preferential parking, the bullet points 2 and 3, the second and third bullet points are good. However, the details are important, and there is no details in here. So we really have to work this out. On the a few points down, just probably about 10 lines above the bottom, it says this implementation will discourage cars from being stored on street, including cars not in operation. I believe we have laws on this. I believe the city police and the neighborhood services have laws on this. All we have to do is implement it. We don't really need to expand it. But one thing which we haven't really considered on this report is, what about the owners and the managers of multifamily apartment buildings? They don't reside in there. They don't have an address in there. However, quite often they need to go there to make repair, to show vacant units, to show, to show some tradesmen some repairs and whatever. And I think they should also be allowed to get preferential parking permits for those buildings, whoever owns the property, even if they don't reside in there. And also, what about the short temporary visitors? For instance, let's say there is a vacant unit on Jackson Street and it's all full of condos. May I continue, please? Thank you. If there is a vacant unit and a realtor wants to show that place, can she show it or he show it? I think they should be able to do it. So somehow there has to be a short allowance, or the owner has to arrange that. And I think that should be included in this. The most important thing is in lieu parking fee. I'm completely opposed to it for a very simple reason. We might have an excess of parking spaces today. However, if you are going to look long-term and future, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 15 years, maybe in 25 years' time, we won't have those. Let's not forget, when Glendale was incorporated over 100 years ago, the population was only about 12,000 almost. Now it's more than 200,000. Who knows what will happen in 25 years? So let's not just get rid of this. If we want to get rid of this in lieu parking, then let's do it for some community activity buildings, like theaters, like museums, like galleries, like where people will go for cultural events. If that is the case, then I'm all for in lieu parking fee. Otherwise, for commercial office buildings, high-rises, hotels, I'm totally against that. And with that,
that's enough, so.
Well, okay, that's fine. I think I made all the more important points, and I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Okay, next speaker is Linda Lalian.
Good evening. My name is Linda Lalayan. We own a building on the corner of Campus and East Harvard. I'd like to, first of all, I agree with most of the things that the previous speakers talked about, and mainly the enabling TPC to start a preferential parking district. I was concerned about that because it just seems that whoever can stir up emotion and pity by a story that, is told about their difficulties of parking, then if TPC had all the power to decide on whatever they wanted to do, then, you guys would take sides. And that's what was concerning this section. And I hope that from the previous speaker, I do like to see some detail and how, if the TPC does make recommendations about district parking, which is really my main concern about our area car park, how we could come back and, talk about our objections. So, I was kind of concerned about, how much power was taken from the residents if you had to make all the decisions. So hopefully that's been resolved, and I'm glad that you brought that up, about this section that wasn't mentioned. What I would like to talk to you about car park area, and specifically, our problem, from the report that I see here, and I hope I can find it quickly enough, the report basically gives you a report, but there are many issues around which basically, let me see if I can focus on what I wanted to say. I have come home many times driving down Maynard, and I have seen, first of all, the speakers that are here, many of them, not many of them, all of them have a very preferential parking, which is their driveways. They are concerned, they want the extra parking for their guests. I have come home and I have seen, and I have sent Jano Bagdanian and his staff pictures of spaces that are available on Maynard. And when I have driven home around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, there are spaces on Maynard. Now, it is one-way street and they do, need more space. I don't deny that we all need more space. However, up until 6 o'clock in the evening, there are absolutely no cars parked on West Campus, which is not restricted at all. I do not see any Maynard cars except 2 or 3 cars that are vans, that are commercial vans, that come and park on the west side, which is the school side, with no signs. I have not seen any Maynard cars come and park. Car Drive also, I have not seen any cars come and park over there. Now, my concern is that if they really need this parking area, why is it that they do not use the side of the street, which is Campus Street, to park their cars? Because there are no signs, there are no preferential parking signs over there. That's one issue. The second issue is that some people have 5 cars on Maynard, and we cannot accommodate people that have 5 cars, and they have people that they're renting their garages to tenants. These are issues that the city is not aware of, and there are things that you guys have to investigate more. The reason why we went for preferential parking, East Harvard, has been Orange Grove is too far away. No one from Maynard or Carr wants to park on Orange Grove. They want to only park on East Harvard because it's closest to their street. So one little East Harvard is surrounded by Glendale High School, Maynard to the north, the park on the right side, which is to the east, and Carr. We've got these 4 huge, humongous entities that are looking and focusing on this little stretch of East Harvard. So we came for preferential parking, and we got the permission to park our cars. Now, if you make it a district parking, which none of us want, especially people that live on East Harvard campus and Orange Grove, with being sandwiched by all these people, all these huge entities, how is it going to impact us? And that's one of the reasons that a very long time ago, Mr. Bagdanian said that district parking would not be, he would not recommend it because it would escalate the problem. And if you remember, if you go back to your videos, you will see that that's what, you were concerned about, doing district parking. So we are in the middle of, and I also want to mention this, that there is no animosity in a way from my point of view towards any other street. It's just that our building lacks 3 parking spaces. We have 4 units with 8 cars and only 5 spaces. We're fighting for 3 cars to be parked on the street, whereas people are fighting for not their own personal parking spaces, which one of the residents will come here, and he hasn't spoken yet, but he's got a long driveway where he can stack 4 cars, and he only has 2 cars. So the issue is that
You're going to need to wrap it up.
We're fighting for necessity, and they are fighting for luxury for their guests or their family members. And just to finish it up, just one more quick thing. When we were as a community, we were very, very connected with each other. But the disconnect came when they started petitioning for bumps, speed bumps on Maynard, and they did not include Campus, East Harvard, and all of the other streets that's impacted by the school buses.
Thank you.
So
That's
we are a community,
that's
and we
enough.
want to stay a community.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, Ralph Schulin.
Good evening, Commissioners and representatives from the City of Glendale. My name is Ralph Shovlin. I'm a resident of 128 Maynard Street since I got married about 7 years ago. I first want to thank Commissioner Wiseman for taking the time back in May to listen to a contentious discussion on the pros and cons of the various aspects of parking in the car park neighborhood. I also want to thank the employees of the City of Glendale for spending quite a bit of time preparing this report. I work for the City of Los Angeles. I know working with various groups within the city is not an easy task. Everyone has their own opinion based on each one's goals and objectives. I did want to point out that about a year and a half ago, came before the committee to have preferential parking for each of the streets. I don't remember who the president was here, but the president did say that based on what he heard, he wasn't going to grant individual parking for each of the streets. He would only give preferential district parking. And that's why we were kind of amazed back in last September to find out that each of the streets got it. I'm very happy for them, but I encourage anyone here to go right after the meeting or any time. You're going to find on Car Park or Car Drive and Maynard Street, it's going to be packed. And you go to Orange Grove, you're going to find maybe 10 cars parked in 50 spots. You're going to go probably on, I forget the name of the street that Linda lived on. I will admit there, it's probably 50% used. And I'll admit most people will park there. And I'll be the first to admit it's not impacting me because I'm the one with the long driveway, and I can fit 5 cars, by the way, Linda. And I noticed that one of the parking,
No.
If you want to pay me a fee, go ahead. But I also know that there's one apartment in the area that doesn't have enough parking for each of their tenants there. Okay, I can throw stones also, but I don't wish to. I know that you're in a very awkward position, but I encourage each of you to think with a little bit of common sense that if people aren't parking in those areas, they are parking in the other nearby areas, and they're impacting them. And it's something you need to look just not with Car Park, but the adjoining area. And I want to thank you for the time to listen to my side of the story. I know that it's not going to be an easy decision. My way is not necessarily the right way, but hopefully it will have some input in the decision to come up with something that's equitable as best as possible for everybody. And I want to thank you for the time.
Thank you. Next speaker, Norbert Stile.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Norbert Stile. I've been a longtime resident of Harvard Street, approximately 30 years. And we do have a severe parking problem over there, and that's probably why Jano conducted a impact study. And some of the recommendations I think would probably be for the removing the existing one-year time limit allowing admin approval for adjacent streets into preferential parking district. Now, I'm sure that everybody on this council or commission is completely 100% honest. However, let's say somebody else comes in, takes Peter Fodd's place, unfortunately, and he knows somebody on our street or campus or Orange Grove, and he wants to revise it 2 or 3 years from now. And we just went through the work of petitioning and having all of these things, time-consuming things happen, and here's this person that wants to change everything, which is pretty much happening right now. Now, removing that one-year time limit, I think, should not be removed. As far as enabling TPC to start a preferential parking district process without residential petition, taken away from the people, that's my main concern. Everybody has a voice in this room, and if you take it away from the people, then it becomes a dictatorship. So that is my main concern, that everybody goes through the process of having a petition, being able to be educated, like Jano said, and basically let them know the pros and cons. And that's pretty much it on the bullet points. Now, Peter Fott, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. You mentioned that Maynard didn't go through the process of having preferential parking, not privileged parking. That's what Harvard has. And they have the option of doing that now. They've had the option of doing that for the past year and a half. Why don't they do it? All it takes is one person to go with a petition and go through the process. We did that. Harvard did that. Orange Grove did that. And, because of one street, Maynard, everybody's going to be impacted because of one street. There's 4 to 5 streets there already. And because one street doesn't want a petition, everybody else has to go through a district parking, which will put us back to point A all over again. Everybody's going to have problems with parking. So, what does it matter if we have district parking or preferential parking? To me, it really doesn't make sense to have district parking because you're putting us back to point A. And there is parking on West Campus that can be utilized. Okay, there's approximately 12 parking spots, but everybody wants to park on Harvard because that is the main artery, east-west, 2 streets going up north. So that is the main artery. People don't want to walk. 50 yards? Heck, if I have 5 cars and I only have room for 3, or I have 5 cars and I only have room for 3 in my driveway, that is creating a problem in my book. Why don't they park the other 2 cars on campus? Walk. You probably are behind a desk 8 hours to 10 hours a day. Everybody's busy. Walk. What does it matter? That's pretty much about it for me. Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Thank you. Next speaker, Sergio Lalayan.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sergio Lalayan. I am Linda's husband, long resident of Glendale. I moved to the city of Glendale in 1983. And this unit that we purchased when my wife and I married, our first building we bought together and moved there in, I believe, around year 2000. That right now is a main concern of all this parking dispute and problems that is going on. Everybody had an opportunity tonight to come here and talk about their part of things, but there are a lot of missing things that I feel very responsible to fill the gap. One of the major things that I want to bring into your attention, when we started this problem with our parking situation, took my wife about 2.5 years to come in front of the commission with numerous hundreds of PowerPoints discussing about our problems and about some part with Glendale High School, some part with other people who were parking. We had a main concern, and we exhausted the commissions, we exhausted ourselves, we went door to door, knock on people's door, one-on-one. Every person who had a chance to come here tonight and says that they were not getting, did not receive anything, simply is not true, because I hand deliver all the flyers and all the communications, and I know very well Mr. Bagdanian, when we were here for the first time, in the same commission meeting, I asked Mr. Bagdanian, he says, I mailed all of the residents, and they have the same opportunity to come here, discuss their problems. Unfortunately, most of the people who have concern tonight, at those prior early meetings, nobody showed up, nobody came. I remember very well, Mr. Aram Sahakian, in our last meeting, was in the summer, that he said, is this the last meeting we're going to have? Are we done with this? Are we going to? And that was when Mr. Sahakian, as back then, as a chairperson of that commissioner, give us that parking preferential. We came here for 2.5 years to get that. It's not privilege, and I believe it or not, I don't know anybody in this room that they send me a private privilege and that kind of a language. We certainly don't appreciate here that we came, we got the privileged place, and we brought warring to the community. And before Linda and I moved to the community, this was the Tom Sawyer's hunky-dory community. Then evil people came and started bringing division. I appreciate not talking like that, because that is not me, that is not my wife. We were first person who opened our room, opened our homes to each individual member of that community. I remember who served tea, coffee, pastry. And I asked every member, went door to door, said, please guys, come on in. We have an issue. Let's discuss it as a family. And let's get something done and for the community and all that. And please don't come here and give this picture that we were having such a wonderful time before they moved and divide our community. It is not true, and we never done that. And the problem that we are facing right now is very, very, very different. And what is that? People come here and say, we have this problem at Maynard Street, which, for example, us who do not live in the Maynard do not understand what's going on. I brought into our last meeting when Mr. Wiseman has a privilege to be in that meeting. And I talked to Mr. One of the council members, I forgot his name, John, what was his name? The parking commissioner, well, it was another gentleman, young gentleman, Jeff Brown. And I said, how come, Mr. Brown, on the Maynard Street, there are 12 buildings, and each building has about 8, 9, 10 units, and each one has 10 parking lots, and nobody parks on those spots. Why is that? We cannot force people to park there. You have a building that is 10-unit apartment, and your tenant, instead of parking on their parking on Maynard and bringing chaos to our community and forcing me out of my apartment building, you cannot tell people to park in their parking spot? I mean, what kind of logic is that? And when I walked into the car drive and I see most of those people that voice concern, they are renting their car garage, okay, and they're parking on the streets. What about that issue? Why you're not being honest to come here and talk about your problems? And you continually accusing me and my wife about being these mean people here and not issuing your community. On Maynard Street right now, go walk. There are more than 9 apartment units with more than 10, 12 parking in there. And nobody parks. Everybody wants to park in Maynard and Harvard. And that's what it is. Everybody has their eyes set on that little strip, and because from that strip they can look at their house. And as my wife said and brought to this commission, I'm going to finish with that. Most of these people who came here and concerned their voice, for your information, you don't need me. You can walk there. They have front yard, backyard, side yard, 100 other places they can park. And I'm very surprised, city of Maynard Street has more than 200 residents. Why is it always these 3 people have to come here and be the representative of that big community? Why there are no other people from Maynard Street coming here and telling us their problem? They don't exist. And every time we bring the solution, they reject it. And they keep telling that area is the problem. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, our final speaker, Reggie Louie.
Thank you this evening for your time and your consideration in listening to everyone before us. Reggie Louie, I'm with Pacific BMW, and I thank everyone before me that has mentioned our dealings with you and the community. I just wanted to say, also I'm representing the Brand Boulevard of Cars, and I represent. I'm the vice president of the council there. And I just want to express my thoughts on not performing any actions today. I know there's a request to action that you make some policy changes or policy to recommend which policies in this package are appropriate, and I think that it may be necessary to gain more business members' feedback on some of these decisions that may impact the businesses greatly in this area. I know that we have recently undergone a major development that all of you are very well aware of, and that we have provided for employee parking and vendor parking and customer parking, and we also have off-site locations. But as a business operator, we also have difficulty enforcing some staff to use these facilities that we're providing. For instance, they like to go out on breaks and go out on lunch and have that public access to areas parking around. And from what I've heard this evening, it's not just between business owners and residents, but it's between residents on one street to the next. So I think we need to look at this in a great depth, because we may just be pushing a problem from one place to the next if we don't impose something like a district parking. The other issue I have, or I would like you to consider, is that some residences or units or commercial lots have adequate parking, and some residential places are underprovided for parking, and there seems to be a disconnect between units for families and the number of parking that they should have and that they don't have, and that it puts undue stress on other residences and the businesses and the vendors that want to visit upon the car dealerships. Something they do in where I live in West LA, is that they limit the number of parking permits per household. And I personally have paid a lot of fines simply because my wife and I cannot have, they only limit two parking spots. And if you have a guest, they need a guest parking spot. And having preferential parking is going to put an undue influence on a lot of the residences and the income-producing properties that some of the people in this room have with regards to parking. And I just think overall that this needs to be looked at. I've just received this. This document is dated December 7th, so I've only had this evening to look at it, and I'd like everyone to maybe look at it in a little more depth with a little more analysis before we make any recommendations. I thank all of you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'm going to close the public hearing section and open it up for commissioner comments. So who would like to go first?
Well, can I mean, there's a lot here, and each one is an onion. And so I don't know if it's possible to do a good job in recommending going over the entire committee study without, because every one has several subsections, as the car park and the car neighborhood illustrates. There's a lot of feelings on, and you could go to any part of the city, I'm sure, stir up the same feelings. So that's one thought. Maybe we need to break it up, and then as we discuss this, I think we have to keep very focused on what we're discussing, because preferential seems quite, in a way, is different than in lieu. I mean, they're fairly wide topics, all addressing parking, but we could get stuck in the weeds here for hours if we don't have a focused discussion, and maybe, well, and limit what we discuss and sort of think about how we're going to think about it. Yeah, please.
My feeling also is that I didn't see enough businesses come up and give us their concerns. We heard from the chamber that they would like more time. It could be, Thanksgiving season, holiday season, what have you, but I think we should give the businesses more opportunity. We heard from the residents, but mainly it's about preferential parking. And I think staff gave adequate notification. That's not the issue, but the concept and the ideas and the items are far more complex than we can, just make a decision on tonight, honestly. And with that, my recommendation is going to be to maybe Mr. Bagdanian do another notification, maybe this televised meeting tonight is an opportunity for people to be aware of it and come next meeting and give us more input on it.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, if I may, a couple of things we can do. Definitely, this is a many complicated issues, and we are not expecting you to, after this meeting, that you were going to take your recommendations, package something, and then go to City Council. This is kind of work in progress. So this was our first shot at basically encapsulating all the ideas, issues that we know generally, and we try to get some of the residents, for example, this issue of car park. It's not a simple issue, so if the commission recommends a district, you will have some folks that are happy about it, or if the commission can create a district, some folks could be happy about it, some folks may not be happy about that. So that's a typical thing that we thought it would be a good example for the commission to know what the issues are out there. So if we make any policy recommendations, how would that impact the real life practical situation? A couple of recommendations or suggestions to the Commission to consider. One is we can set aside a time with the Chamber of Commerce. We can coordinate with them that they can, invite all their members. We will basically walk them through this whole idea of the preferential parking, in lieu fee parking, and kind of give them an education. So give them an opportunity to their individual merchants to make, give us input at a particular time and date that we can set aside with them. That's one option that we can arrange for them. Also, we can give the auto dealers, because they're a major business base in the city of Glendale, meet with their members and kind of get input from the auto dealers as well. Again, based on what we've produced to date. That's another option. Thirdly, what we did, just to summarize some of the key issues, at least get some ideas from you, each individual commissioner. If you agree or disagree with some of these things, Michael prepared a kind of a summary of some of the key issues. There's a lot of detail. The devil's in the details. But at least, for example, are you okay with the idea of a tiered permit parking fee? Are you agreeable to that? So what that fee is, it's different. We can calculate the cost of issuing a permit, and we can come up with some numbers. But is the Commission agreeable to that? For example, give us some direction on that. Are you agreeable in general about the district or no district? Should the district be something that, as a result of a residential neighborhood coming to the Commission and petitioning, and then we look at the area and says, okay, let's kind of consider a district instead of Commission initiating district, or the other way around. The Commission has the authority to do that. So we just want to hit you with those key issues so that we can do more research about it. We heard from the public, from some of the businesses about their concerns. We can develop this more, go back to the subcommittee, share it with the subcommittee, and then set aside some workshop or outreach meetings with the key areas in the city, chamber, auto dealers or others, homeowners in fact, and then give you more input, and we'll bring it back to you. There's not a set deadline that we have to accomplish that. We'll report back to council that this is a complicated issue. We're still working on it. We'll be bringing back to the Commission, and we will provide updates to the City Council as we go forward. So those are things we can catch. We have some of the key issues already listed. We can put it on the PowerPoint, and Mr. Chairman, if you wish to just kind of get some kind of input on each issue, just give us some. It doesn't have to be very detailed. At least we know we're on the right track based on what you heard, and then we can go back to our homework and come back to you with some more information in the future.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I also would like to see the school district invited and involved in this, because I think they play a big part of it.
Yes.
Let me make a comment. To go along with Mr. Bagdanian's request to kind of get the ball rolling here on comments, something that stood out to me that I thought needed to be addressed, and which was put in the summary, was this idea of a cash-out program at Nestle. I know that was one of the case studies. And to me, I feel like this cash-out program is, you know, they have all these available spaces. I believe it's causing a detriment to the community with the employees, instead of using the garages, filling up the reside or the adjacent streets. I don't know if the city has approached Nestle at this point or before about this, speaking to someone there about working with their employees to remedy this. But to me, I don't understand why they would be able to receive a big increase to their quality of life to the detriment of the residents in there. So to me, that seems like an issue that may not be too controversial. I'm not quite sure, but there's these empty spaces that are not being utilized. And to go a little bit along, Mr. Milano had mentioned the idea of measurable impact, and I do actually agree with Mr. Milano when he brought that up. I don't believe any fees should start going up until we can tighten the belt and look at all the other options that are available, including this cash out, which I think, including, you know, looking at enforcing the current laws, people storing their cars on the street, and I think that's all an enforcement issue. So before I see the need to increase the fees to the residences, which I know it's may not seem a lot, but I know a lot of people in South Glendale who have a lot of, you know, they have a father working, mother working, and their child has a car. They don't have place to park. And so I understand this is a big issue. But before we start putting the fee onto them, let's see what we can do to create the space.
Okay. You want to make some?
Okay. First of all, a little bit surprised because I was kind of expecting that the issue of bundling versus unbundling would maybe be the most controversial thing to come up, and that hasn't even really been mentioned. I'm a little bit concerned, too, regarding this initial report to the City Council, which is dated January 27th, 2009. And the very last paragraph talks about public outreach, and it says, based on council direction, staff proposes to conduct outreach with apartment owners associations, the Chamber of Commerce, commercial property management groups, as well as those neighborhoods impacted by commercial parking overflow. And I also recall during our subcommittee meetings, Commissioner Welch asking specifically if the apartment owners, for the one discussion we were having, were contacted. And to the extent that we're hearing from the Chamber of Commerce and other people that hasn't been done, I guess I'm a little bit disappointed in that, because I think our impression was that there was activity happening in that area. And so to the extent that hasn't been done, I think, as Mr. Bogdanian said, we need to take a little bit more time and make sure that all the stakeholders are involved in this process.
Mr. Chairman, in respect to the outreach in general, just speaking for us in planning department, is that, you know, we sometimes have a dilemma. Do we just go out there and, you know, take a document like this and share it with everybody and get their input, or first bring it to the commission and get your input, and then go back outside? So this is where the stage is where we thought, because the two commissioners were involved, it's probably better if we at least get you involved, so you've been in this work effort, get some ideas from you, and then we use this as an opportunity to inform the chamber and everybody else. At least we get some initial indication of where we're going and are we doing the right things. And then absolutely, Commissioner Weiss, when you're right that I think we need to get the chamber more involved, because there's key areas that can impact their members, auto dealers, and the residents, homeowners.
So tonight is more a preview for the public.
Just to give you a preview, it's just the first, like a trailer showing where we're going, and then as we go forward, we will definitely make sure, because this can have major policy implications on every neighborhood in the city, on the businesses, and on the Chamber of Commerce members. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay. So John had also suggested maybe we go through a few things to give some feedback.
Let's go item by item. And
Yeah,
then
just give you some idea, and there might be other things that we left out. You can provide us with that input. So, Mr. Chairman, if you want to lead that, this is where, on an item by item, we can go every bullet one at a time, and you can get input on that based on the time you want to allocate on each one. So we don't really have any preference, but we thought we can capture most of the key issues.
Could I mention maybe something as a preliminary thing in the report is to maybe set forth some sort of goals or policy objectives? For instance, are we encouraging use of available parking? Do we want to, like the bundling is probably one of the key issues on this. Do we want to encourage making people take transit, making it a little harder to park versus using available spaces? Maybe setting up some sort of goals for the city, and then I think some of these things can fall in. Are we promoting less cars, more transit, or utilizing empty spaces? Are we trying to create more spaces? The in lieu fee?
All of the above.
All of the
It's all of the above.
And maybe a few just statements like the in lieu fee can cut both ways. Are we shortchanging the future, or are we reducing over too many parking spaces? Is it and so on and so forth? So.
Boy, well, that's the crux of the whole issue, is that so many of these things are interrelated, and have to be considered side by side with other things. And also, just touching on those big ticket items, it's very hard to do in the context of what we're at today. So I think that the plan was, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, but to try and focus us on the minor policy modifications, that is something that we can act on a shorter term basis. The more moderate and longer term ones, basically sending those back for study with our thoughts and feedback with Nelson Nygaard and that kind of stuff. That would be a more ongoing thing. Am I correct in your kind of assumption
Chairman,
of how you were?
I think, just to answer in general, the goals that we're after was established in the mobility plan. There was a goal, let's not go out there and build more parking spaces, to encourage more people to drive. So we have a lot of parking in the downtown. Find ways to manage the parking in the downtown and build less. On the developer side, where it costs more money to buy the land and build more parking. So if we can have a win-win situation that if they save money by not building more parking, but then they share that savings with the city, whatever percentage or ratio that is, that can be turned into better public transit, better facilities, amenities, and so on, to encourage bicycling, etc., all those other things, then that would be another goal that we're trying to achieve. So it's kind of all of the above, but we think it would be good if we can at least have some quick winners. In other words, we have the minor adjustment, medium adjustments, and the major adjustments. We want to, let's say, if we can take care of just the parking fees, the process by itself, petition process by itself, we can go to commission, to city council, get that approved, and get that in place. The TDM ordinance is going to take more time. In lieu fee is going to take more time. So as we go forward, I think if you just give us some direction of where you like to be.
Why don't we start with this slide here?
Okay.
This is not the detail slide. It's the with the main subjects.
That's the one.
Pull that one up.
Yes.
So then we can let's go down the line and talk about each that list as a total list, and then we can move on to the next.
And from there, Mr. Chair, what I recommend is to prioritize and work with what's realistic, do what we got right now, existing parking spaces, and then whatever is a long-range plan, then, put that at the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're with the minor policy recommendations to start with.
Okay, so I'm just going to go down the line here and ask everybody to chime in their thoughts and try and give staff some direction on this stuff. Let's try and get through this because we've got 2 more slides after this one to go. So, Pete, do you want to take the lead on this?
Yeah, very quickly. I guess it would make sense to require landlords to provide on-site parking if they have availability, but more than maybe one per unit or a number to be specified by unit. As you pointed out, if there's flexibility, if someone doesn't have a car, maybe they don't need it, and more people have more cars, they can use it. I think unbundling, I think, is the goal, is it not, so that you can charge extra for parking, because we want to discourage people from driving.
Well, there's a debate about that. I mean, because a lot of people say, no, if the building has spaces, they should go just to those tenants, and it should be allocated fairly amongst the tenants. But, you know, the flip side is that some people don't have cars, and, you know, actually allowing the landlord to charge for parking does try and, you know, encourage them to do other things. So that's the debate that we had many times in the committee. So I think we're asking you for what your opinion is about this stuff.
I guess to allow some minimal parking for tenants, but you could charge for more than the minimum. And if that minimum is one per bedroom, one per unit, whatever the minimum parking code is, something like that. But beyond this minimum, which you would be entitled to, you could charge for. Maybe that's overly complex, but sort of.
Okay. And the other items?
Well, the preferential parking, I think, you know, there's a lot of issues raised. I mean, I jotted down some things here, not only in terms of, and the speakers raised some interesting points. If we create a district parking, it raises the point, the interesting thought of, could the preferential parking be, could you permit be used on an adjacent street, as long as it was within the district? So a person on Maynard could park on Harvard, for instance, or vice versa. That might be the idea.
That's the theory.
That's the theory. And if the commission is going to be able to propose districts, at this point, are you suggesting we require the residents on that street to vote, in addition to us? We just initiate it in effect, but you still have to otherwise go through the process, or we can do it without voting, without.
Well, there would
be the residents.
No, there would have to be some resident involvement. That's the notion of the counter petition, that the commission could say, well, we think it would be a good idea if this street was included as part of the petition, included as part of the district, but then the residents of that street could then create a counter petition that would come back to us and force that kind of a public hearing. Anyway, that's the kind of the idea behind that.
Would this be a good point to make? I think, and I do agree in adjusting the prices of the permits. I think that it's not, doesn't work the way it is. I mean, some other factors should be. I've jotted down some other things that ought to be considered. Maybe considering a preferential district. Should I mention that?
Yes, please.
First of all, the basic need. I've been involved in things where. Is there a need for the district? Is there a shortage of parking? That's sometimes a dispute. And I'm mainly thinking between adjacent businesses and residents. So is there a thing? I think at the current time, business owners do not have a vote in
That's
the district.
correct. They do not vote.
Maybe that should be considered, adjacent businesses. All their alternatives, the Nestle question raises that. On the one hand, it's good that they offer alternatives to parking, but if they have 50% usage and we're going to foist it on the streets, that's an issue. So alternative availability should be an issue. I think maybe I know a person can apply for different times of day, evening, morning, all day, all night. Maybe some consideration to how much flexibility there should be in times of day. How to count the units? I know that's already been considered. That's in the report. Vacancy shouldn't be a no. And as I mentioned, the multi-street permits within a district. So those would be the additional things I would suggest.
Very good. Thank you.
Well, it's maybe a little bit hard for me to do this because I was sort of involved in crafting these, and it's probably just too easy to say, yeah, I agree with everything. But certainly we're still hearing new issues being brought up that deserve to be considered with all of these things. But in terms of the three minor policy recommendations that are outlined here, I'm pretty much in agreement with what the document says, and I think especially some concerns have been raised about enabling TPC to start the district process without a resident petition. I'm not too worried that some future power-hungry TPC members are going to come in and replace us and run roughshod over the community. So I don't think that's likely, especially given our current situation where all commissioners are appointed by a city council member to whose term their term is tied. that basically gives, if any of us were to engage in bad behavior, it's going to reflect directly on the elected official who appointed us, and we do serve at the pleasure of the council. We could certainly be removed for anything along that. I think that's all I have.
Okay. I will chime in as well. The issue of the unbundling and the bundling of the parking was to me a very important issue, and I draw a distinction, frankly, between those neighborhoods where they're well served by public transit, where I would say there I think it makes sense. But when you get into neighborhoods where they have older buildings, where they don't have, any parking or limited parking, the unbundling in those kinds of neighborhoods becomes a much more challenge, especially when they don't have public transit readily available. So that's why I think the big push towards the whole overall transit management district kind of approach, where in those kinds of areas, you could allow the unbundling and the charging of parking and stuff like that because they have other options available to them. But in the rest of the city, where people need a car, it should be required that the landlord, if they have parking available, make it available to the tenants in their building. I'm very in favor of that.
So different rules for different areas.
Yes, depending on the circumstances. Yes, I think so. And in terms of the preferential parking district, for me, this is an issue of efficiency. And I think that, notwithstanding all of the comments that we have heard, district-level parking, preferential parking districts make more sense from an efficiency and a management of parking issue. So I tend to be more along the lines of that. But again, the devil is in the details in terms of how we create that, the petition, counter-petition, and all that kind of stuff. That would have to be worked out very detailed in the ordinance drafting process. And as a resident of a preferential parking street, I think that raising the price to a more reasonable level to pay for the administration of it is a very reasonable suggestion. I don't want it to be too much higher either, personally, but, it should be somewhat higher, and certainly I think it should be a stepped price. So the first car can be very inexpensive, the second car a little bit more, the third car maybe a lot more, so that the disincentive is there for adding more cars that get parked on the street.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, one of the issues that we're faced with, for example, let's take Maynard as an example. Even if we gave everybody a parking permit on Maynard, like we were saying, why don't they apply? If they applied, everybody will get a permit, they'll have the same problem.
Yeah.
So I guess the question has been raised in our discussion is, do we limit the number of permits to the number of spaces or a percentage of over and above the spaces that is available on street? So if we have 20 parking spaces, maybe we issue 30 permits instead of unlimited number of permits that we can issue to each resident. Because right now, a resident can come in, once they have the preferential parking, if they have 4 cars, we will give them 4 permits, plus they get 2 residential guest permits as well. So although they have a problem that's created by adjacent business because employees are parking there, but right now we don't have a limitation on the number of permits that are issued on a street, even though there's not enough on-street parking available if everybody got a permit, which they do right now. Yeah. So that's another consideration. I wanted to get some input from the Commission if we should look into limiting the number of permits that we issue on a residential street where there is a preferential parking petition. Because, right now there's no limitation. Even though if we have a structured or tiered parking, what if all the residents still say, okay, I got 4 cars, even if you made $100 a permit, I'll still, and it's a better deal to pay $100 for a permit for a year than go rent the parking spaces in a city structure where they have to pay $45 to $60 a month. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the issues.
Go ahead.
Just question on that, Jono, and that is, if a family, they have a reception, their daughter's getting engaged or what have you, and they're going, or Thanksgiving dinner, they're inviting 15, 20 people. It's a one-time event annually, let's say. How are they going to address that? If we're limiting, and I'm all for limiting it, don't get me wrong, I like limiting the number of permits, but you will have exceptions to it, and how would we handle that?
Right now, the way we handle it, which we have that problem, not a problem, we have that situation, people have a birthday party or something, they know when we inform them about getting their permits, they know that they can call us in advance. We give them a one-day permit. We issue like special permits for that day, and they give it to their guests as they arrive. They can park in that district for that period of time. It's for one day only, for that day. And we can do the same regardless of if we limit the permits.
And they don't
that
need a
works
petition.
fine. I'm sorry?
They don't need a petition or permission from their neighbors on that?
No, because we know it's, as you said, again, if it's something happens a lot for one residence, which we haven't seen that before, but in general, they give us a call far in advance, we mail the permits to them in advance, or they can come and pick it up 24 hours or even the same day we issue the permits and give it to them.
You want to continue on?
Yes, I will. Now,
Well, I mean, in answer to your question, from my point, I guess maybe you should limit it,
Yes.
because you don't want to pay for it and then not get a spot.
No.
But you'd have to be like a lottery, and maybe it's an annual lottery. I mean, there has to be some way of a fair distribution of the.
What we've done
keep in mind time of day, so that's
Sure.
some overage.
We can come up with a form in our public parking structure for monthly parking. If we have 200 spaces, we sell each space 3 times because people come and go at different hours, and it works out. In residential neighborhoods, it's a little different, but I think at some point limiting the number of permits is a good idea, because right now, even if no business employees parking on that street, given the number of permits we issue, you can still go home and pay for the permit now that we're going to charge more and not have a chance. Maybe you increase your chance better if we have a limited number of permits issued, if we're going to raise the fee.
Like 110% of the space.
Or maybe even 200. I mean,
Please continue.
Some formula.
okay, so you have my position on limiting the number of spaces. As far as item number 1, I just want to make a statement that it is meaningless if other commissions are going to issue variances. And I've seen it happen day in, day out, and I brought this a couple of years ago. It was an issue for me. Politics comes into play, and unfortunately it will in the future. But I want to be on record stating this, that it doesn't make sense. All this doesn't make sense if they go to one of the commissions and they get a variance for it for some reason. It's down the drain. Now, having said that, I think the approach we need to adopt at this point is that, which staff has done some homework on this, is availability of existing parking. What's available at city structures. Now, from there, if the employer is not providing parking to their employees, on-site parking, I don't want to bring up just the Nestle building, but there are other businesses, then I would like to put a condition for them to provide parking for their employees in a city facility at a reasonable price. Now, if they're not doing that, as a step 3, what I'd like to see the incentives that they are providing their employees as far as telecommuting, van pooling, and the likes, basically. They need to have some type of a system to accommodate this. It's not a secret that we have shortage of parking in the city. No ifs and buts about it. So the businesses, as much as I would like to assist them, and we need to find a median between residents and businesses, but they need to step up to the plate and do their own due diligence to show that they're going to address the problem. That's the first item. I'm all for it. We need to strengthen the existing parking codes, absolutely. As far as preferential parking, I've been doing preferential parking for a long time. I've sat on hearings for preferential parking in other cities. And 90% of the time what it does is it shifts the problem from one streets to the other, and that is the reason for district parking. And I'm 100% for it, and I commend you for that. It needs to be done. As far as adjusting the pricing for parking permits, I think we should be able to raise it to the point where it breaks even. I mean, we're not looking into making money out of this, but I think it should cover costs. I'm all for that.
In regard to the strengthening the existing parking code, I'm completely for it. However, the issue of enforcement comes to my mind. I'm not quite sure how the city would plan to enforce that requirement of the parking space, and then it puts the tenant in a perhaps an awkward position of having to squeal on the landlord for not having that parking space. So the question, I think it's a good thing. I'm obviously I'm all for that, but I do have the question of the enforcement issue, how that would be enforced. In regard to revising the existing preferential parking district, I'm all for that. As Mr. Sahakian said, I agree with what he was saying. I'd like to see, I think it was Mr. Gregorian had also mentioned the 60%. I don't think it should go below 60% for the approval requirement. And I would also cite the Arlington County, Virginia, that was used in the mobility study. That particular area also has a 60% threshold for them, and they're doing quite well in that area. So I think that's it. Oh, let me see one more.
Pricing?
The pricing. Well, again, the pricing, I'm all for it. Obviously, it has to reach a point where you can, cover your administrative costs. However, I don't want there to be a position of raising the cost without. Let's show some action before we start putting it on the tenants. I'd like to see the tightening of the belt. I'd like to see some other ways to do this before we start increasing fees. But I do see it at the end of the day, fees needing to be increased.
Mr. Chairman, is there consensus among the commissioners? Because we have to come up with a percentage for the petition. Is there a consensus like 60% is the right number? Again, there's not a scientific way of doing this, but we want to at least get that one. We have to have a percentage.
65%.
I was going to say, during our discussions in the subcommittee meeting, we did toss a few numbers around, and I think that was one of the ones that was mentioned. 60 or in that ballpark.
I'd be for 50, but if 60 to be consensus. Because I think I think when people didn't like the 50 or the 50, they were addressing other concerns that wouldn't necessarily be solved by a higher margin. But if we get the vacancy thing taken care of, then 60 is probably...
Yeah, that's fine for me too.
So 60 is fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to the moderate policy recommendation slides.
Very quickly. I think the in lieu option is good. I thought somebody mentioned that in another city it's done monthly rather than an annual or a one-time annual fee. I think that's an interesting concept. I think that should be pursued. And I think, the variance problem, I think the in lieu option maybe it helps the variance issue because you're in effect then charging for the variance. If you're going to get the variance anyway, let's charge it for it. Let's charge for it. And I think if we have such a surplus of spaces, let's use them. And I agree with the other items on the list.
Again, pretty much, I don't have anything. It seems like the in lieu fee is going to require a little bit more discussion, and there are some details in there and issues that need to be ironed out. And I think it would be worthwhile to hear a little bit more from other members of the development or property management or landlord communities on that issue. Definitely the Downtown Mobility Fund to provide funding for all of this. And I think also that some of the items listed under strengthening existing TDM ordinance, because of the fact that it includes goals and ridership surveys and establishes a yearly implementation schedule and annual reporting, that there's good basis for control and management and analysis of the success or lack thereof of this when it gets implemented. So, again, pretty much in favor of all three as they stand here.
As am I, and I too like the idea of the more monthly in lieu fee as an ongoing recurring thing, as opposed to the one-time fee, which who knows where it disappears to, in the black hole that is city budgets. But I think that regular ongoing thing, because then it can be more monitored and matched to direct transportation needs. So.
The in lieu fee option, again, it goes back to what I stated for item number 1 under minor policy recommendations, and the reason I like the monthly option is because if you are not providing parking to your employee on site, then you provide parking to your employee at a city facility. If it's $135 a month, it's $135 a month. And you also should be obligated to have a shuttle system. Let's say the Nestle building, if they're parking at the orange lot, it's quite a distance. They can provide a shuttling system from the orange structure to their building in the AM hours and PM hours to transport employees. That's one reason I'd like to tie it to the monthly concept. Also, the monthly concept could be increased versus a one-time fee. You just pay off your way out of it, and in 20 years, building a parking space in a parking structure could be worth $60,000 and not just $15,000 to $20,000 or whatever we're going to collect. So that's my 2 cents on that. Although it's a very sensitive issue, and again, the question that you felt it's complicated, I will throw that in again, and I think we need more discussion on this. The Downtown Mobility Fund, absolutely, that's a no-brainer. And the last item, looking at the SCAG reports, in 15 to 20 years, it's scary. Again, this is a no-brainer for me that we need to push for this one. Period.
In regard to the in lieu fee option, I'm going to reserve giving an opinion on it because I honestly would like to get more information about it. Don't feel like I have all the angles that I need to have in order to come up with a solid opinion on it. The Downtown Mobility Fund, I'm all for that, and I am for the strengthening the TDM ordinance. So that's it. Moderate changes were.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to go ahead and finish it up?
I think if you wish, I think there's some more in there that we can, on the major side, that may not be as complex. Again, we're going to bring these back to you, but if there are any specific areas you feel very strongly about it, let us know so that we make sure that we capture it.
Okay. One more down the pike.
Yeah, just very quick, on the Nestle situation, as I understand it, they have plenty of spots. It's by virtue of them charging, at the city request, if you will, that they've created this odd situation where people would rather park for free in the street than pay for something and park in the lot.
It's actually because they have this incentive system to pay people to not commute. So people take that money, but then still drive. They just don't park in the Nestle building, they park on the outside streets.
Exactly. So it's not... So when we talk about preferential parking in that area, that's one of the factors, and it's sort of the larger thing was sort of touched on earlier, is the sharing of the downtown availability spots during the day and evening. It's critical. I don't know what leverage we have to have owners open at their spot and liability issues, but I think the consensus is plenty of parking. It's just it's not available for people.
It's not well managed. Yes.
On the last things, I simply am in favor of all of them. I thought the major ones were easier. The minor one was the hardest.
So I'm almost tempted to say ditto, but what I will say is, in regards to especially creation of a transportation management district, as you mentioned, all of this stuff really does tie in together. It kind of needs to be considered as a package, and really what the TMD does is to create an umbrella, a management and operational umbrella over all of these various facets. And basically the problem we're dealing with is to try and appropriately manage, the demand for parking given the supply that we have. And what we're talking about today, I think, is essentially assembling a tool chest that will let us do that.
And I would just add, it's not just parking; it's also the transit issues, because the congestion issues, is going to be, it already is a big issue in the city, and it's going to get even worse over time, we know, as population grows and density increases. So having this plan to manage that growth process is very important. And the only thing that I agree with my fellow commissioners, the only thing that I would add to this, creating new funding and financing mechanisms, it's not just about generating the money to pay for stuff. It's also to provide the right incentives and disincentives. That has to be a very important part of how you do this funding mechanisms, because only when you have the right incentives and disincentives can it actually have good effectiveness.
And can I mention just one thing? The transportation, it's a region, add a regional notation on it, because I think prior studies have shown a lot of people come from outside Glendale in and vice versa. So whatever funding and district, it might give us more heft, and has to be a regional dimension to what is being done.
It has, and on that note, I don't know why, for some reason, Glendale is not considered the transportation management hub. Some of the rail lines that are being proposed, they're bypassing Glendale completely, not even having stops in Glendale. So that is a concern of mine. I'm all for these three items, although the last one, revised parking standards, I'd like to make that a priority. The first 1 and 2, they're more midterm, long-range type of an approach, but revising the parking standards, I feel we can do that fairly quickly.
Good point.
I pretty much agree. I just had a question. Commissioner Sakin, what were you? Could you explain a little bit more what you were saying about the less frequent stops?
Well, I mean, as a general policy, the city of Glendale, in the Tri-City area, it's not, for some reason, and I don't want to misspeak on this one, but from discussions and from what I've heard, it's not being considered a transportation hub. For example, if you look at the high-speed rail that is being considered,
Right.
I would like to have a stop in Glendale, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And why not? I mean, we're a metropolitan city. We have a beautiful skyline. If that's a criteria, yes. And we have a healthy population. And at some point, the banking industry, it was the center of the banking industry.
Mm.
So I'd like us to be, as a city, more important for those high-profile projects that are being considered, and honestly, that the funding is available for those because of the stimulus packages, and that's what's going to move the country's economy. So they are realistic. I wouldn't be surprised if a high-speed rail breaks ground sooner than everybody thinks of.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what I wanted to get across.
Okay. Were you referring in any way in terms of like the Tri-City Alliance that's currently being discussed with Burbank and Pasadena?
Not only that, not necessarily only that, but the city of Glendale as a city, as a city.
Well, back to the majors. I'm fine with them and really don't have anything extra to add to it.
Okay. So, Mr. Begin, do you have any final
That's
questions?
very good. Thank you. Appreciate all your detailed comments. Again, as we go forward, we will develop these, and then it's work in progress, and we'll be bringing back to the commission for your consideration. And then we will also include workshops or coordinate with other interested or impacted parties in the city to make sure we get their input.
Good. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we have a motion for you, and it has been goes through all of these items that have been discussed. What we could do is try to have this motion adjusted to what the discussion's been today, or we can simply rewrite the motion to say that we hereby direct staff to take into consideration the items that have been discussed in the meeting as per the report that's been issued as of this date.
Or Ms. Sansoni, maybe we just not necessarily need a motion. We can just take
We don't necessarily need
all of
a
this information into account, and we'll bring back those to you. We don't really need a motion. I think that what we were looking for was your input, which we received today.
Okay, very good.
Then we can leave it
We'll
at
move
that.
on without a motion. Item number 7, please.
Item 7, Commission Staff Comments Updates.
You have anything?
Commissioner, Chairperson Welsh, members of the Commission, as you know, we don't have a meeting. This was our last meeting in 2009. And so our next meeting will be in January, as scheduled on fourth Monday of the month. We have a number of issues that we will put together. We're putting together kind of a rolling calendar for next year that you'll pretty much know what issues are coming up, and there's some issues we may have to move around depending on what kind of a direction we get from City Council from time to time. So in January, our regular meeting will occur. One item is we would like to invite you for a holiday lunch. That's the minimum we can do for all the time and effort you put in. So we will contact you and schedule the time and date and the place so it's convenient for all of you to attend. That's all the comments that I had from staff.
Do any commissioners have comments?
On your calendar, are you going to you penciled things in for the entire year?
There are certain ones that, for example, on this effort, we will work with the planning staff and try to put together a schedule. So at least certain meetings of the year, we will just have to block it because it will probably take one meeting of your time to discuss one of these issues.
And you're going to share that with us
Yes,
in
of
January?
course. Yes. We'll give you an idea what's upcoming. There in January we have, for example, a taxi renewal permit to be considered. We have a preferential permit parking issue that has been pending, and we will be bringing that back because we cannot hold some of them as they've been in progress. So if there's an issue with them, obviously Commission can delay decision on them. But in January we have that, and then we will work with Michael and Alan Loomis to put together a schedule for the upcoming changes on the mobility plan or any of those items that are coming down. If there are certain environmental reports or studies that come up, we will share those items with you, or we may get a referral from council. We're going to have to lock in certain dates of the meeting, have nothing on that agenda because we don't know what may be coming up for the commission. But we'll work with you, and if they have certain items that you want to put on the calendar, we'll be happy to do so as well. So we'll share that a calendar with the commission in January.
I have no comments other than to say thank you, fellow commissioners, and I look forward to working with you. I can find a parking spot.
And I wanted to thank my fellow commissioners for electing me chairman. Thank you
You
very
did a
much.
heck of a job.
Thank you very much. And I also wanted to open it up if you have any particular things that you want to see the commission address in the upcoming year. You can reach out to me at any time and make suggestions or comments that I will be more than happy to try and bring to the table.
Do we have your email address, contact information, or?
Yeah, I think on the last...
Yes, we provided the new commissioners with a list. Make sure that you all receive via email a new address, which I think that was been provided. So if you have any questions, comments, again, you can email me as well, and be happy to address them for you.
Just one question, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Sanson, if possible. Undoubtedly, the topics that we are looking at and we're analyzing are going to get political. When we get speakers on the podium, if they're registered lobbyists, are they required to reveal that information?
Not at this time. They're not required
They are not.
to give that information. No.
All right, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Yes.
Just wanted to mention something that's a little part of our recent history. Mr. Bogdanian mentioned taxi licensing as going to be an upcoming item in the coming year. And we recently had a 3-2 vote on this commission regarding the issuance of an additional taxi license to a company that was trying to break into the taxi business in Glendale. And we heard a pretty fair amount of contradictory information regarding ownership, because the new company wanting to come in was claiming that the other companies that are licensed to operate in Glendale are essentially owned by one person through, umbrella corporations or some other kind of thing. What I was going to mention on that is I think it's a very important and legitimate concern for members of this commission regarding whether or not someone who's licensed to do business in this city is a monopoly or not. And I think that was my concern, and it was also Commissioner Welch's concern. And so I just wanted to say, for the next time that taxi licensing comes up, I'd like to request, to the extent it's feasible, that we get timely and accurate information regarding ownership of all the companies involved, and that perhaps the city clerk's license inspector staff be involved in doing research into corporate ownership of companies so we can get accurate information about ownership. That is a legitimate concern. Unfortunately, one of the things that happened when that TPC decision was appealed to the City Council is there were some disparaging remarks made about one of our members, Mr. Sahakian, in terms of his professional qualifications. And I just wanted to say, for the record, I think that was entirely inappropriate. I'm very grateful, in fact, to have Mr. Sahakian on this commission because he does this stuff for a living every day. And I've learned a lot from him, and he has a lot of knowledge and practical experience to contribute. And I just want to say I was disappointed to hear, and that would be the same for any member of this commission that were, denigrated in such a fashion that's completely inappropriate. And I also want to say, just briefly, first of all, welcome to our new commissioners. Congratulations. And I also wanted to thank Commissioners Sulayan and Marabian for their service. Just in case they're watching, they put in a lot of time. And this is a job that has no pay and no perks. And so, it's not really... the allegations of nepotism and stuff like that, I don't think really apply to jobs with no pay and no perks. The municipal code of the city of Glendale basically wants members of this commission to have the capacity to understand and analyze issues dealing with transportation and parking and deal with them appropriately. And to the best of my knowledge, there is nobody on this commission that does not meet that criteria. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said.
Mr. Chair, one last. We are going to make arrangements for Commissioner Mehrabian and Sulayan to be here. Hopefully, at the next January meeting, we give them a plaque and recognize and thank them for their efforts. So we will do that at the January meeting if they are available. If not, we'll make sure that there's a time and date that they're available, which we'll do that.
There's one more quick thing I forgot to mention, and that is that particular 3-2 vote, of which I was one of the two on the losing end. The City Council upheld the Commission's decision in that case. And in spite of the fact that maybe I feel like I was on the wrong end of that decision, I appreciate the fact that our elected officials do back up the decisions of this Commission.
Mr. Chairman, in response to Commissioner Weissman's request, at our next meeting, when we bring any taxi issue, we are going to, based on available records, give you the information about the ownership of the companies. And I'll ask City Attorney's Office with regards to whether one company owns so many cabs, is there anything wrong with that in terms of competition and from a strictly legal standpoint. So we will give you an analysis from that, because that was an issue that was brought up at the council meeting, and I think that needs to be discussed because we're dealing with allocating permits to taxi companies, and whether they're doing a good job or not, there's a difference of opinion on that. So we'll definitely bring that for you at the next meeting.
Yeah, I would be interested in knowing how can we consider ownership in what respect?
Sure. That's really the key issue.
Mr. Chair, I hope we're going to see Mr. Sulayan and Mehrabian at the holiday luncheon.
Yes, they will be invited. Yes.
Okay. Anything else, anyone? Okay. Next item, please.
Item 8, adjournment.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.
Thank you.